We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Welcome back, Tom. Thank you very much to Lee Overstreet for pinch hitting for us last week. And I'm sad to report it's been a rough time up in Canada, in BC. I mean, it's continuing with the wildfire stuff, but the stuff that's been happening in the Okanagan Valley, Kelowna in British Columbia is this is a real term that they coined it on the news. Because there were 3 out-of-control fires around the valley, and they decided to all combine into what is now officially referred to as a mega fire. So that, as you might guess, is not a good thing whatsoever.
Right.
Like, I will just say, I don't mean to make any light of it at all. I'm just trying to not get freaked out, because there was footage of that some people just took on their cell phones from across the lake. So these are people who are on the safe side of the lake, which is like 1.5 kilometers away from the fire. And there was just footage of, like, imagine that your lawn in your front lawn was like super duper dry and got on fire, and how quickly the fire would go from one end of the lawn to the other. Well, it covered like 10 kilometers of forest in that same amount of time. It was like the most terrifying fire I have ever seen. It was not sped up footage. It was truly unbelievable to see that going on in real time. Like that is just horror. That is utterly awe-inspiring, terrifying fire. So that's been going there. The Northwest Territories is all burning down and has never done so before that far north. So not fantastic times. We've got the vestiges of the hurricane that hit California coming up our way.
California got a hurricane and an earthquake on the same day.
Oh, the same time? Yeah.
God.
You know, if we were like personifying the Earth, it's like kind of like, is this a defense mechanism? Is it telling us to go away?
I don't know.
Yeah, wow, freaky stuff. So, trying not to think too much about that, but just historically, that's what's going on in the background this week. So, here we are. Yeah.
So when people thank us for keeping the podcast going, it's through whatever natural disasters are happening this week.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to make it sound like this has happened to me personally, but, you know, it's pretty close. I've got people I know who are in the Okanagan Valley, so, you know, thankfully they're okay right now. But yeah, it's a little too close to home, you know, to feel comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a great. So that's it for the podcast this week, people. We're too depressed.
Well,
we're too depressed to talk about AV next week.
I don't want to
we'll try to get back
pretend
to
that the real world doesn't exist. So, you know,
no, it just makes the rest of this seem so insignificant.
Well,
for sure.
But I mean, we all know what we're here to do, and it is to, you know, get our minds off of this stuff for a couple hours every week, and people thank us on the regular for doing that. So yeah, I mean, I apologize. It wasn't my intention to like freak everybody out. I'm just saying hey, I'm not going to ignore what's going on in my own head entirely.
Tell you what,
so, yeah.
Maybe the Mayans just had a couple of years off.
Yeah, right.
It's supposed to be 2012, right?
Yeah.
The Mayans?
Off by a decade, you know, which for predicting it hundreds of years ago wouldn't be that bad.
All right, what did you watch?
Okay, yeah. So, I did watch a few things this week. Finished up Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. So is
that the cartoon?
Nope. The cartoon is Lower Decks. This is the live-action one. This is Christopher Pike's crew about 4 years before the Kirk crew comes in to take over the Enterprise. So, I think I overall, as an entire season, probably enjoyed Season 1 just a little bit more. Season 2 was a bit more episodic, a bit less tied together. This was the season of people falling into and out of love, and since it's only 10 episodes, very, very quickly, kind of felt like half a season, to be honest. If this had been a full 22-episode season, it probably would have felt paced a little less suddenly because things did go very, very quickly in season 2. But yes, very, very enjoyable. Some of those one-off episodes were excellent. I very much enjoyed the very interesting crossover between Lower Decks, which is the animated show. So you have live action crossing over with animated, and the way that they handled all of that, I actually thought that was maybe the best episode of the entire season. So if you're a fan whatsoever of Star Trek, and even if you're not, this is one that you could come into and check out and might make you a fan of the whole thing. So highly recommend that. Then I'll go with the third thing I watched first, which is The Day the Earth Stood Still, the 2008 version with Keanu Reeves. I had never seen it before. I've always been a big fan of the original version, 1950s version, black and white. And so it's difficult, since I was a fan of that version of it, and it's my dad's favorite movie. So when I was a kid, we watched it every year. So comparing this version to that, I mean, they're very different movies. So at least it let me kind of go, okay, forget about even trying to really make any sort of direct comparison. This is telling its own story. I was wondering if they were going to base it a little bit more closely to the short story that both of these movies are based upon. But no, this is definitely... It has more similarities to the movie version than it does to the original short story, because the original short story was considerably different from either of the movie versions.
This tells you how bad cinema was back in the day, because the original version of this movie is tedious. It just drags.
Yes, well, I mean, by today's standards, sure. Yeah, it's very...
Well, by any
it's
standards. I watched it when I was a kid, and I was like... I remember seeing it on TV or something. I was like, is anything going to happen? Or are they just going to sit outside this freaking... spaceship forever?
It's very calm, it's very talky, it's very low-key until the very end.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what tedious... That describes tedious perfectly. Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up for the rest of the audience here. That is what tedious is. Nothing happens until the end.
I see, yes.
That is a tedious
The
movie,
2008 version, Keanu Reeves, very good at playing an alien. I got to give him that. Absolutely...
He mostly acts like an alien anyways. And you have to remember, this was 2008. This was before all the John Wick stuff when he was back, right?
That's right.
This was still when he was kind of in this weird, I am not Bill and Ted Keanu Reeves, and I haven't found my dad revenge porn
sure, yes.
Niche yet. And they were like, well, who can we cast that's a famous person but acts like a weirdo most of the time? We're like, well, Keanu Reeves.
Yep.
Nails it.
Absolutely.
And he's actually really... I saw this movie. Okay. I agree with you. He's very good in it.
Yeah, and Jennifer Connelly.
Yes, who I would read the newspaper, honestly.
Absolutely. Of course, she's very, very pretty, that very angular face of hers, but I was almost feeling uncomfortable because, man, she looked positively skeletal in this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness, she was
he's a sandwich
looking,
girl.
very, very, very scarily underweight in this movie. But all of that aside, this version of it, I was like, it was almost the reverse, right? It was kind of like, I actually quite enjoyed it until the end, and I was like, oh, you kind of dropped the ball at the end for what both the short story and the original movie version, what it was all about. I'm like, you kind of missed that at the end of this version of the movie. And I'm like, well, if you're going to get one thing right or wrong, that was a little bit disappointing on that front. But no, not nearly as bad as some of the reviews I had seen before of it.
No.
I thought that was perfectly fine and watchable. So yeah, the last movie I watched this week is called I Origins. I is just like the letter I, as in referring to myself, I Origins. It definitely could have been spelled EYE Origins, because it is all about the I, and also I, myself, so they're playing a homonym thing in the title there.
I don't think I remember this at all.
No, this is from 2014, independent movie. It's, what's her name? The woman who did the AO and Another Earth, Britt Marlin? First name's Britt. Anyway, I know her that much. I think it's Marling. Anyway, it's her and her crew doing this one. She's not exactly the lead. I would call her the supporting actress in this one, but she is in this movie, and prominently so. So this I found to be quite an interesting movie, particularly from the writing side of things. I would believe that this is a movie that was more or less written from the end, working backwards. Like, if this is where we want to get, what sort of has to happen before that to make that make sense. There was quite a bit of a sense, at least to me, in the writing from that standpoint, which does lead to the result of, when you're watching it front to back instead of back to front, there's a little bit of and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, until you see the later event, which sort of explains why the earlier event more or less had to take place narratively. A big example is towards the end. It's like, in order for the narrative ending to work, they need to not take the elevator going upstairs, but they need to take the elevator going back downstairs. And it's like, they came up with that before they came up with the reason why they don't take the elevator going up. Like, and when you're seeing it in chronological order, you're like, okay, why did that scene exist? And then by the end, you're like, oh, that's why that scene existed, so that they had a reason to not take the elevator up at the end of the movie. So there's a little bit of that going on. But I found the movie quite interesting from a writing point of view, because this didn't... this wasn't some kind of cookie cutter writing, and there were many places where you could tell that they knew what the trope was, and they intentionally subverted the trope. So, for example, there's many high resolution photographs of eyes in this movie. That's what the main character is focused on. He studies the human eye, and then the evolution of the eye, all throughout evolutionary history. And so there's a scene where he's studying a photo that he took earlier, and you're like, oh, he's gonna notice, the detail in this photo that he took earlier that he's been missing and looking for this whole time, and that's what the scene felt like it was gonna do. Well, they didn't do that, but he did notice a different detail that led him further down the narrative plot of the movie that was unexpected. So it was kind of like, I think they were well aware that they were playing with that trope, and they subverted the expectation. But basically, the narrative of this movie doesn't go anywhere that you think it's gonna go from the beginning point of view. Many unexpected things happen in this movie, and for that reason, I was absolutely hooked watching this movie from beginning to end, because I didn't know where it was going to go, and it subverted my expectations, my writing and narrative expectations all along, and I think they did a very good job of that. So I would call it more interesting than like a favorite type of movie of mine, but worth a watch. Origins from 2014, and if you got some time, I think it's worth a watch.
All right, so 2 weeks have gone by since the last time I was here.
They have.
So last week I would have talked about Night Agent,
yes,
or maybe the week before that, and as well as Bad Batch Season 2. Both of those things I finished. Night Agent, my family and I really liked it.
Okay.
It's, you gotta, with all these things, you gotta have some suspension of disbelief when it comes to certain things. There's... the hacker is a hacker, and the guy's breaking laws left and right because he's in the right and he's doing the right thing, and everybody kind of like, at the very end, you're like, the very last episode, of course, with the big culmination and stuff, you're like, dude, no offense, you're going to jail.
I see.
like super max prison, way going to jail. It's,
but we were along for the ride.
We were along for the ride.
Okay, gotcha.
Absolutely, and it's certainly not. It feels like if you're a fan of the 24 series, it feels a little bit like that.
Okay,
but it doesn't do the whole chronological, like this is what happened during this minute sort of thing. But it's very, it feels very present the entire time. Like it's a very short period of time while this stuff happens, which again is not unbelievable. But then again, in 24, they're driving around LA in like 10 minutes.
Oh yes,
nothing. You can't get down the street in 10 minutes in LA. I know, I live there.
Real time. It's a fictitious version of real time,
but certainly worth a watch. I think it's like 10 episodes. It's all up on I think FBI or CIA. I can't remember, one of those, FBI agent or whatever, and he's
one of the initialisms in law enforcement.
Yeah, protecting somebody calls in to this line that he is manning, and he ends up helping her, and then it becomes sort of he ends up protecting her for the rest of or becoming her partner. I don't even know how to really qualify their relationship by the end, but they are that's the whole, so it's sort of this, if you're into like, that sort of 24-ish
little bit of action spycraft.
Yeah, I'd go that far. And
then
there was actually, like, you're talking about subversion of tropes. I fully expected like there to be like there's definitely a bad guy couple, and then there's these two who are kind of a couple, kind of going against each other for like the big, most of it. I expected there to be a big like shoot out something at the
Sure.
in the last episode, and they didn't do that.
Okay.
They did something completely different, which was interesting.
All right.
And it definitely subverted my expectations in that. Bad Batch season 2, which is a cartoon about some clone troopers
In the Stars of War.
in the Star Wars universe over at Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Like halfway through the season, I was like, I think they forgot they were making shows for kids, because it was pretty lighthearted for the most part, and then about halfway through the season, it got super serious.
Yeah, I mean, many of the animated Clone Wars related things seem to do that a bit.
And I was like, and my son and I, he's 14 years old, we're like invested. Like at the end of every episode, it wasn't quite a cliffhanger, but you knew something more was, because they're all kind of self-contained episodes until like the very last couple. But you're like, oh my god, this is getting kind of there's a lot of stuff going on. And the end of season 2, they gotta make season 3, because the end of season 2 is a full-on cliffhanger. It doesn't even try to have a resolution. So my son was like, that's the last one. I'm like, apparently, because they gotta make season 3. I'm like, I don't know.
There seems to be like, that's not uncommon these days. It's like the creators are just literally daring the studio to be like, just go ahead and try not to renew us.
So, if you've made it through the first season, or if you've watched any of these episodes and you're not completely annoyed by some or all of the characters, you're gonna like it. You're gonna like it. It definitely gets better as it goes, I feel, and it's like I said, my son and I were totally invested by the end. Lastly, I somehow found the time in the last week to rewatch the entire series of Moonknight.
Oh, you rewatched? I thought you had watched it before. I couldn't remember clearly.
And there's been a lot of me, or a lot of people talking about superhero burnout and blah, 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 right? And I have, I think, vocally said, I don't think that's a thing, it's being ridiculous, people, whatever. And I'll be honest with you, what I do think happened was there were so many shows that came out on Disney Plus that were like superhero back to back to back, that by the time I got to Moonknight, I was like, you're not as good as WandaVision.
No, I mean, I've heard the criticism, and I think this is an applicable phrase, is dilution of the brand. And I think that's fair criticism, what Disney's done in a lot of ways over the past several years.
They've slowed down, and I think it's
They've started
to their
now.
benefit.
And they're also going to be forced to with this double strike, which is continuing on. There's going to be some
Well,
delays.
I'll be honest with you. I think COVID and the strike, the two things, really stopped Disney from completely screwing up Marvel, because I feel like Marvel was on the way. Because I watched Moonknight again. Oh my god, I liked it so much better the second time.
I would predict that for myself too. I'm sure I would like it a lot better on second watch. And it also feels like if it had been a 2.5 hour movie, that there was a way to turn that series into a 2.5 hour movie.
And I mean, I just felt like, first of all, the Moonknight costume, by far, one of my favorite costumes.
Actually, that was one of my favorite things, was seeing the behind the scenes of all the detail that those people put into creating that costume, because there is a real costume for Moonknight, and they put in a gazillion little details that you are never going to see. Doesn't matter if you're watching it in 4K resolution. There's stuff that's like under the flaps and under the folds and stuff that I'm like, man, these people put their heart and soul into this stuff. It
is really, really a good series. And even with the final, the final episode, and I remember seeing, when I watched it the first time, you would see QR codes kind of pop up on things, and you could like scan it with your phone and then get a free issue of like the Moonknight, Moonknight's first comic and stuff like that. There's lots of little Easter eggs in there, but knowing what after seeing the entire thing and then watching it the second time, you catch quite a few additional things. It's I feel way better than I gave it credit for. I think I need to watch Loki again, because I remember getting to the end of Loki and just being like, ugh.
Because the ending was the end itself was such a turn from where the rest of the series had been the entire time. So instead of finishing Secret Invasion, you rewatched Moonknight.
Oh, I did put that on here. Secret Invasion. I did finish that.
Oh, you did finish Secret Invasion. Okay.
Yes, we can talk about that.
That one, not to influence what you're about to say about it, but I'm like, I don't know if I need to see that a second time.
Yeah. Okay. So the one thing, because I don't read like the hit pieces that these different websites and stuff put out about anything that's Marvel. Like, there's like a whole faction of the internet that's like, if Kathleen Kennedy has touched it, it's evil by the fact that she got her womanhood all over it, right? How dare she touch my Star Wars? It's like, if Dave Filoni had done it, it would have been way better. I'm like, I don't really know that you can say that, but so, I tend not to read. So the one thing I read about the one like headline that I did scan enough of to is that it was problematic in that it is, this series was problematic because of the invasion and whatever. It was like somehow anti-Semitic, and I was like, I didn't really get that. I didn't really get that through. That seems like a real
twisting and turning and stretching to get to that. Yeah,
sure. I really feel like you can take anything and say it's anti anything if you try. If you
honestly,
look at it
if they had said this is more like apartheid in a different country, maybe. Oh, absolutely. Maybe closer to that. Yeah.
Yes, but I just was like, wow, where did they get that from? So, as far as pacing, and I mean, if you're looking for a show that doesn't have, if it's Marvel and it doesn't have a lot of action, I got a show for you.
Yeah.
There are fights in here, and there is some action scenes for sure, but for the most part, it's very slow paced. But it wasn't.
I mean, they were trying to go
interesting.
Yeah, they were trying to go for the spy thriller. Unfortunately,
but there wasn't any thrills. It wasn't thrilly.
Well,
to me.
Yeah, I mean, like COVID production, massive amount of reshoots, rejiggering of when things were coming out. It all led to. I mean, like the scenes in. I'm not going to spoil anything, but the scenes in the hospital towards the end. It's like. There is nothing even remotely realistic about that setting for who the person is, how there's nobody around. Yeah. And it's like the reason there's nobody around isn't the plot. The reason there's nobody around is because they reshot that in like 12 days on a soundstage and they just like didn't have any extras. And it was kind of ridiculous.
Well, yes. And I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. So there's definitely some problems here. I want to, if you've ever seen The Spirit, which is a movie that was directed by Frank Miller.
Yeah.
Okay. And so Robert Rodriguez, who did the Frank Miller adaptation movie of, what's it called? Sin City, which was very good. I liked it. I liked it a lot. It's like Frank Miller went, man, that was great. I want to be able to turn one of my comics into a movie. And they like, as far as I can tell, like just looking at the movie, it looked like they just said, go ahead. Or maybe he just paid for it or something. I don't know. But if you watch that movie and you watch, because Samuel L. Jackson is in it, and everybody knows Samuel L. Jackson is a great actor. Sure. Right? There's no doubt about that.
And he's not the problem with Secret Invasion, honestly.
He is not.
If there's good scenes, it's because he pulled out the acting for it.
Yeah. But if you see that movie and you see the amount of pauses and stuff that Samuel L. Jackson puts into his performance there, it was like there was no direction going on.
Or just that's an editing problem, really.
Editing as well. So that, to me, there was a little too much of that in Secret Invasion. I felt like Samuel L. Jackson was like, dude, hurry up, say something. You're just staring at people. Like he would sit down and then sigh and then look and then say something. I was like, we could have done with all the rest of that. We just need to have you sit down and start talking. It would have been fine. So there was a little bit of that. So when in acting, when we talk about that, that's like an energy vortex. It just sucks the energy out of a scene because there's this weird pause it's not a pregnant pause. It's just dead air.
Sure.
And there was a little bit too much, like, to me, this whole season, and it's only 6 episodes.
That's right.
I feel like there was an episode full of pauses that could have been taken out of the entire thing.
Yeah, I could see that.
So is it bad? No, it's fine. Will it have a lasting impact on the rest of the Marvel Universe? I don't know.
I mean, it could, given what they did at the end there, but it also could have as much impact as the Eternals had. So, I feel
like the Eternals should have a lot more impact than it did.
Exactly. Yeah. I
feel like it will at some point, or at least they'll mention it. I mean, there's a big hand in the middle of ocean someplace.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, for the characters that, not to spoil anything too much, but I mean, some people die throughout the series. And for the characters that did die, I kind of like the takes where, like, if we're watching watching The Marvels coming up, the movie coming up, and like those characters just show up with no explanation, I'll be perfectly fine with that. I'm completely willing to ignore that this series existed, or they just say, that must have happened in a different universe, and on we go, because I would be absolutely fine with that being the case. So when you kill a character, especially a well-known character, you kill a character just like if you think about the first Avengers, Coulson, right? That's right.
You kill him because it increases the stakes significantly. And if you kill a character like that, and let's talk about Zack Snyder and that train wreck.
Maybe let's go
DCU.
on quickly because we have a gazillion questions to get to. But yes, let's wrap this up.
So at the very beginning of the Dawn of Justice, or whatever the heck it was, maybe even Justice League, I don't remember which one. There's Jimmy Olsen, right? Who is never named as Jimmy Olsen, but you find out like through the reshoots and not reshoots, but
I think he did
behind the
introduce
scenes stuff
himself
like
or
that.
something.
Yeah, and he immediately gets killed.
Yeah,
and you're like, that meant. I mean, then it doesn't mean anything.
It sure did.
And that's sort of.
You would absolutely have to know the name from the comics or the other movies for it to be worth anything to a new audience. Meaning
this tries to up the stakes as well with by killing a character that you know, but never really does anything with it. Like it's mentioned a couple of times throughout that, and that's about it. And it's not really as big of a deal as you expect.
That's what I mean. That's why it'd be fine if they just showed up again with no explanation, and that's it.
All right, that's fine. I could keep talking about this stuff all day.
But we won't because we got oodles of questions this week.
All right, AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to the website, comment there, find our older episodes as well as our Flickr albums with our show notes. The Flickr albums allow you to follow along with the pictures we're talking about, and the show notes, will allow you to skip around if you need to, and also let you know what's coming. Contact, I guess Facebook.com/AVRant podcast. I don't know. I feel like Facebook's changing and maybe not letting people post their stuff over there anymore because that was so successful for Twitter.
I don't know.
Elon Musk did it. Yes. YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can see our recording sessions.
That's still going strong.
Desynced lips.
That's right.
Let's see here. Rob@avrant.com is his email. You can contact him directly. His handle on other social media sites is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom@avrant.com. I don't do any other social media.
That's right.
If I can help it. Thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, to support the podcast in some way, one of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and that will take you to a PayPal donation site. So we want to thank Chad, Matthew, and Ari for doing that in the last 2 weeks. So
if I missed anybody from last week, then we caught up this week. So Chad, Matthew, and Ari, thank you all very much for your financial support via PayPal. We appreciate it.
Let's see. If you can't support us financially, support us in some other. Oh no, wait, I forgot. I'm sorry. We also have our patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service you sign up to become a supporting listener. So every month they'll take some money from you and give most of it to us. So we have 135 patrons this month, including Daniel. Thank you very much to our patrons.
That is right. The number has climbed back up, and we're approaching the end of the month. And on September 1st, it'll drop back down when people's credit cards expire. But for now, it's very nice to have you all back. Welcome back, folks. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to sign up to make an automatic monthly donations. A big thanks to 135 patrons over there. Daniel, thank you for being one of them.
And like I said, if you can't support us financially, just support us in some other way and let us know what you did. So Yannick talked this up to his home theater group in Quebec. Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you, Yannick. That's very nice of you. Maybe we'll greet a few new people in. What's that?
Feels like Yannick.
That's like maybe the way I would normally say it.
That's what I would say it too. Anyways, if we also got some thanks for continuing this podcast through Rob's whole country burning down and God knows what's coming on over here.
Indeed.
From JR, who says, thanks for all we do. Matt, he's in the UK. He stopped listening to our podcast for a while since he only had a soundbar and wasn't thinking about any upgrades at the time, but now he's back and listening to us every day while he's driving around at work. Nelson Greg, who thanks us for remaining grounded and not just sounding like advertising or gatekeeping. We do not gatekeep.
Try not to.
Ari J, who hopes we never go away and that we keep on answering questions forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. We're going to need a lot more patrons for that, my man. Nick, Matt, Jason, and Tyler. So in total, we got JR, Matt, because it looks like we have two Matts. So UK Matt, Nelson,
Right.
Greg, Ari, Jay, Nick, other Matt, Jason, and Tyler. Thank you for thanking us.
Yes, I'll say the names one more time so they came from my lips. JR, Matt, Nelson, Greg, Ari, Jay, Nick, Matt, Jason, and Tyler. Thank you all very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. They are definitely appreciated, especially these days right now with everything going on. So a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
All right. Let's see here. Let's go through the news here. We previously covered how Netflix's DVD.com will be sending out its final disc by mail to subscribers on September 29th, and we wondered what the situation would be regarding whether anyone was supposed to return those discs or if DVD.com was just going to send out the final disc by mail and let subscribers keep whatever they had at the time. Well, officially, as posted on their website, you are supposed to return all discs by mail, and by October 27th, 2023, no less, giving you less than a month to watch everything. But unofficially, over at, I'm not calling it that, so over at on Twitter, their account has posted they won't be charging any sort of fee for unreturned discs after September 29th, so enjoy your final shipments for as long as you like. Which could be a real person, or it could be somebody
I know.
paying for a blue check mark. So
they don't even, interestingly, they don't even have a blue check mark on it.
I wouldn't pay for it either.
They never paid for it. And the one that they used to have by being an official verified website back before Elon Musk bought it, that got taken away. So, yeah.
Because he's a very stable
however
genius.
much trust you want to put in that, but it is their official account that posted that, I guess is the verb we're using now. So there we go. Yeah. I also do highly suspect that if you never sent those discs back, nobody was coming knocking on your
I
door.
might sign up and just order 10 discs right now.
That's what's going on.
Furthermore, if you head to dvd.netflix.com/finale surprise before August 29th, you can opt in to receive up to 10 extra discs in addition to your regular subscription level for that final shipment in September. So it seems as though DVD.com is clearing out its inventory this way, at least to some extent. So there you go.
Yep.
You want a bunch of free discs? That's how you do it. Not
Indeed.
free, but free-ish. 3D is making a comeback, everyone. What?
I mean, that
No,
just
it's not.
had to be the headline grabber.
Thanks to Apple and the upcoming Apple Vision Pro headset.
That's right.
Apple's going to fix
Everybody's
3D.
going to buy a $3,500 headset just for themselves to watch 3D movies.
Reportedly, the new 10-episode Apple TV Plus Godzilla series, Monarch, Legend of the Monsters. Legacy of the Monsters.
Even.
Whatever. Monarch. Monarch, isn't that supposed to be the people that are fighting them?
Monarch
Right?
is the organization that
the
knows about
organization.
them and is preparing for them and all that. Yes, that's why the title is there. They should have put Godzilla in the title, but they put Monarch instead.
Why would you want to do that?
Indeed.
We're Apple. We do what we want. I'll be honest. I mean, as much flack as I give Apple, the reality is the fact that they do things the way they want to do them. That is the way to be. You got to stop.
I mean,
you got to not look. You got to be proactive and not reactive. And other companies are just like, we also have we also have a headset. We also have this. We also have that. And they're like, we've got a headset, and it's unlike anything else because that's not how we wanted to do it, and
Pretty much.
we were working on this anyways, and blah blah. Anyways, this Monarch Legacy of Monsters has been shooting in Apple's new immersive video 3D format with certain sequences featuring the 180-degree wraparound view with spatial audio. As far as we know, watching it on an Apple Vision Pro headset will be the only way to experience these sequences in all of their immersive video glory. The only way I'm doing this is if they literally send me a headset.
Yeah. Hey, yeah. You should write to them. See what you can do.
I'll tell you what, my Oculus Quests, the controllers just keep breaking.
Oh,
They
that's
just keep,
too bad.
not working
Yeah.
for no reason. I mean, I say for no reason. They're just sitting there, right? They don't really get used all that much. But every time we go to use one, they're like, "Oh, this one's dead." We put a new battery in it, and nope, it's still dead. So
Yeah,
I've
send it back
replaced
to them.
2.
Maybe they'll fix it for you.
Yeah, right. Shortly after Disney announced that Australia and New Zealand won't be getting any physical disc releases at all anymore, they've now made a surprising announcement in the other direction, at least for the US. WandaVision, Loki Season 1, and The Mandalorian Seasons 1 and 2 will, as well as the movie Prey, will all be getting Ultra HD Blu-ray physical disc releases. Until now, they were only available via streaming. Release dates are as follows. Loki will be September 26th, Prey October 3rd, WandaVision November 28th, which is, I guess, close enough to Christmas. The Mandalorian, both seasons 1 and 2, December 12th. Are there just 2 seasons of The Mandalorian?
No, there are
There's
3 of them out there now, and the Book of Boba Fett, which at least the last 2 episodes of that are kind of vital viewing to go into season 3 of The Mandalorian. So yeah, they're not doing everything, but it's just these, I mean, so WandaVision, Loki, Mandalorian, those are like Disney Plus shows only. They were premiered there. They were created for that service. It was not clear if they were ever going to have physical disc releases, but yep, so far they are. I mean, obviously there are other Marvel and Star Wars shows that were created only for Disney Plus. I'm assuming they will see how sales of these discs go to make a decision on whether other things, like I would like to get Andor on disc. That would be a nice series to have. So I'm sure they'll see how these go and go from there. But yeah, it was a little bit unexpected that they'd have disc releases at all. People have been clamoring for a disc release of Prey for quite a while now, because that was honestly quite a good Predator movie, and it didn't have any sort of physical release, which was a little bit strange. So nice that that's coming out. We'll take what we can get these days.
Yeah, I would consider buying WandaVision for sure.
Yeah.
I liked Prey as well, but
Yeah.
I don't know that I liked it enough to...
Still, though, it's just weird for a movie like that to have no Blu-ray release at all.
Yeah, it is. I agree. Some comments from our listeners. Toke in Denmark. So it's not Token. Toke in Denmark. Just wanted to share his subwoofer results that came as a very pleasant surprise to him. This is the setup where he's using 4 slim on-wall subwoofers in a somewhat L-shaped room, and we told him that the best deployment would be to stack the on-wall subs in 2 pairs, which he did, with the 2 stacks diagonally across the room from each other. He connected all 4 subs through a mini DSP, and he finally had a chance to dig into calibrating them with measurements and manual EQ. He had anticipated using the multi-sub optimizer and possibly needing some trial and error with DRAC, but all he wound up doing was adding a 3 millisecond delay to 1 pair of subs and applying just a slight EQ above 40 hertz to all of them. No multi-sub optimizer, no DRAC, and this is what he got across all 3 seats of his house, of his couch. Sorry, and you can see this on the Flickr album or on the YouTube channel, but you'll see that it's pretty flat except for that one seat, whatever that purple one is.
Yeah, one seat. I mean, that's like 27 hertz.
Yeah, it's got a little suck out there. That's not really that
pretty
big of a
narrow.
deal.
It's pretty darn narrow. So unless you're listening to a sweep in that one particular seat, and then the rest of it pretty close to overlapping lines, and then all that way up to 80 hertz. Then there's a dip right around 90 hertz, but that's into the crossover region, so there's going to be compensation happening from the rest of your speakers at that point. So he's like, hey, pretty relatively easy calibration he had to do, and he was not thinking that was going to be the case going into this.
Yeah, because he listens to Reddit. Pretty darn uniform from seat to seat, up to the crossover frequency to his speakers, and nearly flat right down to 20 hertz. So he's thankful that we talked him out of thinking he needed 4 gigantic 15-inch subs in there. Now we can focus on actually listening to something. I just can't express enough how exactly right this post is.
Yep.
Like the internet will tell you cannot have too much subs, and we will sit here and tell you, well, I mean, yeah, you cannot have too much subs, but you can buy a whole much more sub than you actually need. And this is a perfect example. Flat to 20 hertz, just about, with minimal use of room correction or anything else, just proper placements. I think he's got a little bit of acoustic paneling in here, or at least he's got some diffusion if you look at the stuff that's in the picture. So yeah, it would not have done him any good to put big 15-inch subs.
There also was nowhere to put them, so
I know, I don't know where
glad
he's
he turned out he didn't actually need them.
That's right. Curtis heard our discussion about Ilango set up a couple of weeks ago, where we wondered aloud if he had separate AirPlay sources for each room and how we missed the old Chromecast audio device. For his part, Ilango let us know that he actually has a few Apple Airport Express boxes still on hand, so those are going to be his individual AirPlay 2 sources for each room, no problem there. But if you do need to buy a separate AirPlay streaming device that you can plug straight into an amplifier, Curtis recommends the WiiM Mini?
Yeah, WIA capital M. I don't know. That's the brand name. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm sorry. But
WIIM.
Yeah.
Yes, it's mini, whatever. Well, it sells for $100. It isn't as cheap as the Chromecast audio used to be, which I think was like $30.
Something
but
like
it's less expensive than most of the other streaming connection boxes these days. Curtis has found it simple to use, and he's very happy with the results, and it has its own app available. But once you set it up, you can just use AirPlay or pair it with Amazon's or Apple's voice assistants to send it commands. If you want Chromecast audio and Google's voice assistant as well, there's the $150 WIIM Pro to add those features. So, well, whatever.
Yeah, no, I wasn't aware of this device. Glad to be aware of it. Have that in our back pocket as some, if somebody's like, how do I add AirPlay to my system without spending an arm and a leg or having to buy a gazillion Apple devices or whatever?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, there's $100 little shiny hockey puck that can do that for you. That's at least somewhat reasonable. So happy to know about that. Thank you.
Questions. Let's start with Jay. Jay has an Epson 5050 UB projector, and he remains a 3D fan. Well, looks like you're going to spend a bunch on that Apple
Vision Pro.
Vision
there
Pro.
You go.
He's held on to his plasma TVs pretty much just for their 3D compatibility, whatever. But the official Epson 3D glasses don't seem to be available anywhere. So are there any 3D glasses we can recommend that are compatible with this Epson 5050 UB? Very comfortable, provide good 3D image quality, and are preferably fairly durable. So with my Epson projector, because it is also 3D, which I have never used, you can find these like aftermarket on Amazon, and durability is an issue. A lot, you can read reviews and see, and you're just kind of like, you kind of have to wonder, about a lot. You got to read through the line, between the lines on these reviews, because a lot of times people are like, oh, they broke right away. Yeah, but how are you using them? And how many other people are saying that? Is it, that sort of thing? So you have to read a little bit between the lines there. But they are available.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's certainly glasses that are compatible. That's not the issue.
Yes.
It's finding all the things that you looked for. So, I mean, like, it's a little bit slim pickings. There's not too much that we can do because obviously 3D glasses just aren't a gigantic market anymore. It's a pretty niche thing for people looking for them. And of course, we have the ridiculousness of not all 3D glasses work with all 3D displays. You have to get exactly the right type for whatever transmission and synchronization signal was used. So the most direct replacement for Epson's own original 3D glasses come from a company called 3D Heaven. They're almost exactly the same design. They will fit over prescription glasses. These are the type that have a fair amount of plastic on the left and right sides by your temples. So they're pretty wide. So glasses as wide as mine might be a little bit of a tight squeeze for them. But if you have sort of normal sized, round shaped eyeglasses, they will physically fit over them because they're quite wide with that plastic framing. So the only way you can buy them is as a 4-pack, 4 pairs of them for $140, which is, I think, about the price of one pair of the Epsons when they were brand new, or pretty close to it. So, I mean, that's still a fair amount for 4 pairs of 3D glasses, depending on how much you're going to use them. But that is the most direct replacement for Epson's originals. There is another brand, Ilango, that sells either a 2-pack for $70 or a 4-pack for $120. So, pretty similar prices. If you got 2 and then another 2, it's exactly the same price. Or if you get a little discount for buying 4 all at once. So, I mean, their reviews from users are a little bit more mixed. Some people prefer them in one way and then prefer them a little less in another way. So they seem to be a little bit hit and miss. The price isn't significantly different. The design isn't significantly different, but the Ilango ones are not quite as wide, so they don't fit around everybody's prescription glasses if you wear them. So as far as I can tell, the 3D Heaven are probably your safest bet. They are definitely compatible. The performance of them is basically identical to Epson's own original glasses, so that's probably your best bet there. And they are available on Amazon, so chances are, if they absolutely do not work for you, you can return them.
Yes, where the heck are the Ultra HD Blu-ray releases of The Abyss and True Lies? Didn't James Cameron confirm he was working on them and they'd be out in July? Jay has been waiting and wait. I'll tell you what, The Abyss, that whole scene with the guy going, having like deep sea sickness or whatever the heck they called it, just ruined the movie for me. Oh my God, it just drove me so crazy. I like True Lies.
You can see it in 4K one day.
Yeah. Anyways, great. That'll be so much better. Jay has been waiting and waiting. He'd love to introduce his kids to these movies, but what is he supposed to do? Make his kids watch them on DVD like some sort of peasant?
That's right.
There's a 1080p streaming version, but not in Canada.
Yeah.
There are people selling that 1080p streaming version burned to a BDR disc, which seems sketchy. But getting that would be ridiculous, right? What are we to do? Wait, my man. Just wait.
It has been announced but there is no official release date attached to it. We know how much of a perfectionist James Cameron is, and he is one of the few directors who will insist upon actually green-lighting the final release before it's put out there. He doesn't just put the trust into some third party and go, okay, here's the movie, go ahead and do it. He wants to be personally involved. So it depends a little bit on James Cameron's own whims and time availability, which is very limited. He should have a little more time right now because everybody's on strike, so whatever he was filming for the Avatar movies, maybe he'll be able to go and get those Abyss and True Lies Ultra HD Blu-rays out to us. But it has been officially announced. The only thing to do is wait.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Ilango's going to have a 77-inch LG C2 OLED in his living room. Which Ultra HD Blu-ray player should he get to go along with it? He's in Canada, but popping down to the States to get the player would be no problem. It's a Panasonic one, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a Panasonic. I mean, this is really a matter of, is Dolby Vision and Dolby Vision alone worth about 200 Canadian dollars to you? Because you can get the UB420 for about 330 Canadian dollars, so there's not really much incentive to go down to the US. I think by the time you bring it across the border, it's like a few dollars less in the States, but then you're paying for gas. So by the end of it, there's not really any incentive to go down to the States to get it. So yeah, UB420, the only thing it's lacking is Dolby Vision. And your LG C2 has its frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping for HDR10. So if you're worried about potentially missing a tiny little highlight detail, you flick on that dynamic tone mapping and it comes back. Although on the flip side, it does also tend to over brighten the shadows beyond what the signal actually called for in HDR10. So, you gotta take either end with it. But if you just wanted to brighten up the image a bit and recapture all the highlight detail, then there is the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. So I would not consider a lack of Dolby Vision in the player to be any sort of deal breaker. But that said, if you are a stickler and you're like, I gots to have my Dolby Vision and I have to see that logo light up at the beginning of the movie, then it's 550 Canadian dollars right now for the UB820. So I don't personally really think that the value is there and necessary in this case. But like I say, if you're just like, I have to have Dolby Vision, that's really the only player I can point you to. All the other players that handle Dolby Vision do it in some weird way that is annoying to use. And I would only really ever want to use the Panasonic at this point. So it's one of those two, and it isn't really worth your while to go down to the States to get either of them.
There you go. Longo's wondering if he get away with just a single streaming box. He's interested in using Plex, so if he gets an NVIDIA Shield Pro for that, is it also a top choice for all the various streaming services? We've talked about this, and in fact, there's a comparison on AV Gadgets as well, which may be a little bit out of date, but I don't think it's that far out of date. I know like the NVIDIA whatever can't do like HDR on YouTube or something very specific that. Like,
I mean, neither the Apple TV 4K nor the NVIDIA Shield is the absolute best choice for YouTube. There's always going to be something with YouTube that they don't quite get right.
Yeah, I don't really see. So what you do is you decide what you're going to watch, what streaming service you're going to use, and then look at each box and figure out which one is the best for it. But we normally, all things being equal, we would normally recommend the Apple TV 4K because it is just overall sort of like for most people is the best box. But if you're using Plex, I would think that the NVIDIA Shield would be, and then you just live with whatever limitations it has for some of the streaming services.
Because I mean, there's no question. If you're doing Plex, I want you to have an NVIDIA Shield. It is hands down and run away the best Plex box that you can get. So yeah, then the question is, okay, what happens with all the other streaming services, your Disney Plus and your Netflix, etc. So the one thing that the NVIDIA Shield Pro doesn't do correctly with all of the services is the automatic frame rate matching. That's still the thing, even though they've added a frame rate match feature to the NVIDIA Shield Pro now, it doesn't work properly. You can't rely upon it. Now, truth be told, there are a handful of streaming services that even on the Apple TV 4K do not do frame rate matching completely correctly because you have to use Apple's own video player, and some of the streaming services refuse to do that. They're like, nope, we're going to use our video player, and then the frame rate matching doesn't work on those particular apps. So even the Apple TV 4K is not a truly, foolproof. This is definitely going to work. So the question is, what happens if you just use the NVIDIA Shield Pro and you don't have that automatic frame rate matching, but you're using it with an LG C2 OLED? So similar to last week, Tom didn't hear this, but like on the Sony TVs and on LG's OLEDs, both of them are very good at taking an incoming 60 hertz signal, detecting if it was originally shot at 24 frames per second, right? So it has that 3-2 cadence inside of the 60 hertz signal, and applying inverse 3-2 processing to get it back to being judder free. Your LG C2 can do that very effectively. So not having the frame rate matching in the source device isn't a gigantic deal as long as you have, I'm pretty sure LG refers to it as real cinema under the motion processing. As long as you have that turned on, it does a pretty, no, look, is it possible to run certain videos where the cadence was like mixed so it has a little glitch here or there? That's what I mean, right? It's not going to be perfect, but it does a pretty darn good job of detecting that it was originally shot in 24, even though it's coming at 60. So my recommendation would be you set your NVIDIA Shield Pro to always output 60 hertz and don't bother with its frame rate matching. Let your LG detect that it was 3.2 inside of that container and do its thing, and it does a pretty darn good job for all the streaming services. And then, as I mentioned last week, specifically for Plex, in the Plex app itself, it has its own settings, and its own Plex app version of frame rate matching works really well. So you can use it there for all of your disk backups and everything that you have on a hard drive, specifically within Plex. But for everything else, I just put it out at 60. So I think you can get away with one box because of the display that you chose.
There you go. Their big house renovation is nearing completion, and the family room setup will likely get hooked up this week. Aesthetics took priority, so he took our advice to forget about trying to make the room setup into some sort of 7.2.4 full-blown theater. That'll get saved for the future dedicated theater in the basement. But he couldn't help himself, and he went ahead and installed 2 pair of Sonance Mag 6 speakers in the ceiling in the surround and surround back positions. He's using a pair of HSU and wall horn-loaded speakers up front with, gasp, no center speaker.
That's right.
The front
just
speakers,
left, right.
Yeah, the front speakers will flank a 77-inch C2 OLED. A big rug and thick curtains will have to serve as the only sound absorption here, and they're going with just a single SB2000 Pro sub beside the couch for now. If it just can't cut it, he'll figure out a way to add a second sub one day. I don't think I'd bother with that, but let's go. He picked up a Denon S760H receiver to power the system, but he hasn't opened the box yet. So before he does, do we think there's a case for exchanging it for something else? Will the S760H have enough power given the room size? Will regular Odyssey multi-Q be adequate? I don't think that any Odyssey is going to do anything. I'll be honest with you. In here. Okay, so and this is important to really remind people. Odyssey is not like, I'm going to do the best I can with what you've got. No, Odyssey is going to be like, I'm going to do whatever I can, and if I can't do something that I know is going to be good, then I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah, like here are the measurements that came in from the microphone.
Yeah.
From, you can take up to 8 measurements, and from measurement to measurement, I'm seeing some pretty big differences because of the acoustics of this room. Well, I can't really make one of those measurements better without making another measurement worse, so I end up doing nothing. That's largely what happens with Odyssey.
So I don't think you need to worry about Odyssey in this room. And you've got clip speakers up front, and the overhead speakers are not that far away.
HSU speakers up front, but they are horn loaded. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it said clips.
I like them better than the Klipsch's, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, HSU's in-wall horn loaded speakers. So I don't think I'd be worrying about power in this situation. Plus, are you really going to be listening at reference volume?
Indeed. Yeah, when you look at how close those ceiling speakers are to the seat, because they're right above it. So the distance there, it looks like it's a elevated ceiling in here, maybe a 9, or I don't think that's a 10-foot ceiling, probably a 9-foot ceiling. But even so, right, the distance from there to your ears is, going to be 9 feet at the most if you in the center and using that hypotenuse there in the triangle you create. So, I'm not worried about distance to the overhead speakers. And then you wisely got high efficiency front speakers that don't demand a lot of power. So I don't see a big reason for you to, because as we talked about the S760, now that the S770 just came out, the S760s have been on clearance at a very attractive price, which is probably why he snapped one up. So I'm like, I don't think there's much reason to spend. It's going to be hundreds of dollars more for no gain as far as I'm concerned. So I would stick with.
I'll be honest with you, and you know what I'm going to say about these. I don't care that your speakers are on the ceiling. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh my god, it's a worse thing."
Oh no, I'm not mad about that.
Ear level. No, this is fine.
Yeah,
you didn't need to put 2 pairs up there.
The
surround back speakers are not.
Well, I mean, the thing is, he can
not even behind you.
He can absolutely relabel, right? Because I think the surrounds, which are a little bit wider than the couch, I think that's fine. Keep those as your surrounds. Those surround backs, you could relabel those top middles and give it a try, right? There's nothing really stopping you from that. They'd use the same binding posts even, so you don't even have to rewire anything. You just have to change the label in the menu.
Yeah, the surrounds are. You really need to move that couch forward a little bit.
I mean, maybe you will, because this room is not completely finished yet. So maybe he's going to scooch the couch forward just a little bit, because otherwise, where the couch is right now, pretty much right against the back window, those surround back speakers are directly overhead. They're not behind you. So regardless, you could have a little fun playing with that, because that's literally a settings change to give it a try.
I would have gone 5.1, but
of course.
Nick. First up, Nick got his Atmos speaker setup all hooked up, running off a Denon X3600H receiver. He has been blown away by Atmos and Dolby Surround Upmixing. He can't quite understand why we aren't more impressed by it, and figures it has to be all about proper speaker placement and using in-ceiling speakers like he has. Okay. Yes, because we don't know how to place speakers properly, and that putting the speakers in the ceiling makes them sound better than having on-ceiling speakers like I have, and you have as well. But I mean, okay.
Look, I just want to say I am really happy that Nick enjoys it that much. I mean, we've had people who never had surround back speakers before, install them and go, I love them. I absolutely love them. I wish I had them earlier. I'm like, that is great. I have no problem with someone really enjoying what they just added to their theater.
I don't know why he has to insult us in the same breath. Basically suggests, hey, if you're coming to us for advice, telling us we don't know how to set up speakers
I'm not sure he meant it that way.
Is the first step that you take. Is not how you do it. Okay? And believe me, I get people all the time when they're coming into the bike shop, they're like, I could do all this work myself, but I'm gonna let you guys do it. Don't do me any favors, buddy. Take your bike home, do it yourself. All right? If you already know how to set up speakers better than I do, I don't know why you're asking me any questions. Because clearly I don't know. I don't know what you know. I'm not as smart as you, apparently.
To be blown away by Atmos, I mean, honestly, most movies, not that much sound up there. if you were to isolate them, there's not a whole lot coming on those speakers. So I am very glad that you are very much enjoying it. I have absolutely no beef with that. But I don't think it's that I just haven't heard Atmos correctly.
Yeah, we're doing it wrong, Rob. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think it's that. There you go. Anyway, moving on. Question time.
This question would not have made the list if I was doing this. This would have been like, yeah. I would ghost. Anyways, with his 11 speaker setup, he needed an external 2-channel amp, and since his Denon X3600H has 9 amps built in, so he got since it only has 9, so he got a Dayton APA 150 stereo amp to power his top rear speakers. It's a good choice. In his setup, he can put his ear right against any of the 9 speakers being powered by his Denon and pretty much hear silence when nothing is playing, but the top rear is powered by the Dayton amp. There's a noise floor. It's kind of a low hum, but it changes with the volume, so he doesn't think it's a ground loop. It isn't actually audible from the main listening position, but if he walks into the speakers while nothing is playing, he can hear it and it bothers him. He did turn up the Dayton's amp's its own gain knob as high as it can go before connecting it to his Denon and running Odyssey. Should he not have done that? Is that the cause for the noise floor, or is the Dayton just noisy and you should get a monolith amp instead? Yeah. My temptation is to tell you to go get a couple of monoblocks and be good. But yes, you are correct. You should have not turned it all the way up to the very max.
It's fine to do that and then back it back down a little.
Yes. Yeah. So you turn it all the way up. You go... Yeah. See if there's any humming, and then if you hear humming, you turn it down until you don't hear humming, and then you run Odyssey. That's kind of how you do. I think I have an article about that. How to integrate something like that.
This is, broadly speaking, advice we can give to any time you're connecting any external amplifier that has its own gain or volume knob on it. It is, I think, actually a good idea and a good practice to turn that knob as high as it will possibly go, because you're going to set it once and then never set it again. But I have found that most self-powered speakers, many subwoofers, and then most amplifiers that do have their own gain knob or volume knob on them, it's very common that if you turn it right up as high as it can possibly go, that you start hearing a noise flare. I mean, the thing is, if you took your Denon and just turned its volume knob all the way up as high as it goes to its, plus 17 or whatever that it goes to, you'll probably start to hear a noise floor at that point. That's a very common thing when you're going, it's actually starting to boost the gain as opposed to just getting to full parity, full scale gain, which is often a couple of clicks down from the absolute maximum. So yeah, the best practice usually is you plug it in, you turn it up as loud as it can possibly go, you put your ear close to the speaker and you're like, oh yeah, it's definitely making a hiss or a low level hum or whatever. You back it down gradually, just a little by little, and eventually, you get to, oh, okay, it's not doing that anymore, and now you've probably found what's actually parity gain, where it isn't applying a boost or a cut to the incoming signal at all as far as the gain stage goes. So yeah, I think you'll be absolutely fine with that pretty simple practice. And then you do need to run Odyssey again because it will set a new trim level at that point. The volume coming out of that rear amplifier is going to be different now.
I mean, you could theoretically just use a SPL meter and reset the trim level because the EQ won't change in theory. He's using a 77-inch OLED, but he has been planning for quite a while now to get a JVC NP5 projector with a 110-inch roll-down screen. He would have kept that 77-inch OLED for gaming and TV and then turned off the lights and rolled down the screen for movies, but now there are 98-inch LCD TVs, particularly from TCL. 98-inch R754 is $6,000, but currently on sale for $4,000.
Yeah.
And the brand new 98-inch QM8 with its mini LED backlight and thousands of local dimming zones is $10,000.
Yeah.
If he had done the projection setup, he would have wanted to really do things right, so he would need to paint his room dark, replace at least the front portion of his drop ceiling tiles, run a long HDMI cable, and mount a nice roll-down screen, along with a JVC MP5. He'd be getting very close to that $10,000 price point. 90 inches is close enough that he could just nudge the seats forwards a bit and get the exact same field of view as a 110-inch projection screen. So is off-angle viewing the only real weakness of the 98-inch TCL LCD TV versus the JVC projection setup? What do we think he should get? I mean, $10,000 is a lot of money, I'm going to be honest with you. And
but $4,000,
yeah, the $4,000 makes a lot more sense to me. And yes, I've said many times on this podcast, I'm almost certainly not going to go to another projector unless somebody gives me one, honestly, because there is no, it's just so easy. Because even if you don't like want to move your seats or anything else, just not wall mounting your screen moves it forward like at least a foot or two.
Oh, yeah.
And putting it on top of a piece of furniture or whatever, and suddenly it is closer to you than it was before, and it still looks normal in the room.
Yeah, it doesn't look the least bit out of place because it's on a TV stand or a 3-in-1 stand or something like that. Yeah.
So I'm rocking 92 inches in here, I think is what my projection screen is. Yeah. So I'm not that. I mean, 98 inches is too big. It's too big. Once I
you
put
would
it on
need
a stand,
to flat wall mount it in your case,
and I can't because I got a window there. So,
all right. Yeah,
well,
that's a problem.
I could, but I just have to put something else up there to hold it.
Yeah, I mean, so the off-axis viewing, it is like, that's a legitimate thing, right? Like if you have seats that you care about that are off to the sides a bit, they will get a compromised experience looking at a bit of an angle onto that screen. The far side of the screen versus the near side of the screen will have different contrast. And the other thing where there is still a weakness for those TCL TVs is blooming. There is still, like, particularly if you've got subtitles up there, or in a space scene where, it's pitch black space, but then there's bright little stars, right? There is still haloing and blooming, even on the QM8 with thousands of local dimming zones. That's not millions of local dimming zones like an OLED is. So there is still blooming. And of course, the JVC is not going to have blooming, but then the JVC is not going to be anywhere near as bright. It's going to be like, way less bright than especially that QM8. That QM8 can get ridiculously bright, so you can easily leave the walls white and the lights on, and it's going to still be blinding if you want it to be off of that QM8. So there's a little bit of give and take here. But yeah, I mean, look, neither of them is going to completely match an OLED. right? Not completely. That QM8, honestly, like in those scenes with that many local dimming zones, it can do a pretty darn good job, and it can get blacker than a JVC projector. So, it's slightly in the middle ground, but I would say edging closer to the OLED in out-and-out black level performance from that QM8. And like you say, the price, even at $10,000, that's a lot of money, but to get a JVC projector, a nice screen, and redo portions of your room, absolutely you're getting pretty much to price parity there. So even the QM8 is not out of question. Now, I would urge you to have a look at the R754 if you can find a place that is demoing it, because honestly, before the QM8 came out and was even brighter and had even more local dimming zones, the R754 is no slouch. And at $4,000, boy, can I quickly justify getting that one instead of the JVC setup. So that might be the one that convinces you, because at that point you have, okay, the black level performance actually still even better. The amount of light output easily dwarfs what the JVC could do. And then you're like saving nearly $6,000. You put all that together, it's like, oh yeah, 98-inch LCD makes a heck of a lot of sense. So I would probably lean that way myself.
All right. Yeah, I can, like I said, that is the direction I'm leaning for my next purchase.
Yeah.
James appreciated when we discussed LUFS, loudness units reference to full scale, and LUFS. I don't even know how to say that one.
That's just
loudness units K-weighted reference to full scale. So
yes,
that's
LKFS.
LKFS.
And they have at this point just become the same thing. This is K weighting, which is like difficult to describe because it's like sort of algorithmically weighted. And there's a couple of different versions, like one that gates just the vocals versus one that takes the entire signal into consideration. There's a couple of different things going on there. So, but ultimately, after the K-weighting process, a loudness unit is equal to a decibel. So if we're talking about getting 3 decibels louder, that's the same as getting 3 K-weighted loudness units louder. It's the K weighting that is applying to all of this. So we can interchange LKFS and LUFS at this point, and yeah, that's what it is.
All right. He found another article that wait a second. As well as sharing links to many of the documents that James sent us on various standards used around the audio industry. Mm-hmm. He found another article that details the specific targets for a number of different streaming services, both video streaming and music streaming, which we'll share with you.
Yeah.
Most of the streaming unit music services seem to have an integrated loudness target of between -18 to -14 LUFS, along with a true peak limit of -1 or -2 LUFS. Meanwhile, pretty much all the streaming video services target an integrated loudness that is speech-gated and based on the dialogue level set to -27 LUFS and a true peak set to -2 LUFS. Interestingly, despite predominantly being a video service, YouTube's target for integrated loudness is -14 LUFS. I'm going to stop saying LUFS because I don't care anymore. Just like most of the streaming music services, which might explain why YouTube is almost always so much louder than, say, Netflix. But there are global guidelines set by the AES, the Audio Engineering Society, saying that audio streaming should have a integrated loudness target of between -20 and -16, while over-the-top video should be based on dialogue either at -23 or -24. Other than Apple, nobody seems to be following those guidelines, with most music services being a bit louder and the video services being actually being quieter. Why is there so much Why do people ask us these questions? How many times have we go, oh, I know a guy, and here's the actual answer. Why is there so much variance? And how come, and how does it actually relate to our home theaters and where we ought to send our master volume? Is 0 dB on our master volume still supposed to equal 0 LUFS? Where, I said it LUFS again, sorry.
Well, you kind of have to in that one.
Would it be where 0 LUFS would be, or is that 0 LUFS mark supposed to be equal to the ITU broad standard 1770 specification, whatever. So that's something different. Until somebody somebody makes everybody do it. I mean, how long they passed laws about how much difference the loudness could be between commercials and TV, and the TV industry went, a
little bit.
We're just gonna do it. We're gonna do it. Here's how we got around that, and here's how we measure to make sure that we fulfill the law by not totally fulfilling the law. So it's just, there's just never going to be standardization until they're all one streaming service.
Not full standardization. Yeah, I mean, so let's work a bit backwards on this one, because ultimately, so we have our AV receivers.
Right.
Our AV receivers, if we're using the automatic setup, Odyssey or Dirac for that matter, or any of the automatic setup things, they are still going by the cinema standard. So that signal is coming out of there at negative 30 decibels full scale. It is assuming that full scale would be 105 decibels. So that test tone that's coming out of there, if you're doing it manually with an SPL meter, is minus 30. It's targeting 75 decibels. We still need to start with that, because that is what the signal in all of these automated setup programs is expecting to do. Now, as we detailed the last time we were talking about this reference volume subject, it's now become industry practice, and this is like for the past 10, 12 years, where when they redo the home mix of a movie versus the original cinema mix, they are now setting their own de facto dubbing stages for the home version 6 decibels quieter than that. They're setting it so that minus 30 decibels full scale is registering at 79 decibels instead of 85. So the argument can be made that when you're listening at home, that's basically where we should be at this point. The peaks should be at 99 decibels instead of 105 decibels. And subjectively, that's going to sound about equally loud in your moderately sized living room as compared to the full-size cinema or an IMAX theater, and that you don't actually have to get to 105 decibel peaks. But where everybody's agreeing, both in the cinema and in the home mix, is if you actually just pay attention to the dialogue, that should be right around 72 decibels. Just normal speaking, not whispering, not shouting, but just normal dialogue should be somewhere around 72 decibels, and then we're kind of going to go from there. So a lot of these other, and you can't really call them standards, these are guidelines that the person who wrote this article went through, and they kind of reference where they found these guidelines, right? Apple documents it pretty well, but it's in their guidelines to people who are sending in Apple masters, right? Whereas over at Amazon, they have their guidelines. Over at Spotify, they have guidelines. These are not strict standards where your file gets rejected if you don't do this. They're just saying, okay, here's what we want you to send us, and we know how to master that. And basically, from track to track on our service, if you do this, you're not going to have wild variations in volume. That's really what they're trying to avoid, and that's why Netflix and HBO and Disney Plus, they chose a level at this minus 27 LUFS, where they're like, okay, from movie to movie, it shouldn't have wild variations. But of course, we sometimes still find that. That still happens sometimes, where we do find a big variation from movie to movie because they didn't adhere to this guideline. They didn't get kicked off the service for not doing it. Why, under the AES guidelines, do we have a different number than what the services are actually using? Well, there was a whole thing where they're like, okay, because the AV receivers are set to a different standard, they compensated for that in the original signal, whereas the AES was like, well, if the AV receivers were going to the -6 level instead, then we would want it here, would actually be a little bit louder than what Netflix and Disney Plus is sending. It's all a bit of a mess. What we don't have is standardization across every facet of the industry, and we probably never will. So the best you can do is, okay, they chose a number. As long as they stick to it, you can you can kind of you can get around it. You can be okay. But of course, we have YouTube, you can have wild variations because from person making a video, they don't have to be any professional at all. We certainly aren't. We chose a level that from between our AVRant videos, between them, there shouldn't be wild variations in volume. But
not the way I mix it. Believe me, I compress the crap out of it.
I try to do that as far as putting up the YouTube videos, but from our video to someone else's video, there could be a huge difference in volume because there's really almost no standardization at all on YouTube. So yeah,
it's brutal. I'll watch. There are some. So I watch a lot of times. I just have my laptop playing YouTube in the background while I'm, relaxing or falling asleep or whatever. I'll pick some video that I know is fairly uniform in its volume level. There's not huge dynamic swings that are going to wake me up. There's nobody going to be yelling, right? Last night I fell asleep to archery, I think.
Could be.
I mean, nobody gets real excited at archery, I'll be honest with you. And it's it's just got enough dead space where I'll fall asleep between something happening. And but between videos, we're talking about, there's some videos I can turn the max volume up on my laptop. And remember, I mean, a laptop should be able to get loud enough for you to hear it from like 2 feet away. There are videos that I do that, I cannot. I can barely make out what people are saying. And there's other videos where I'm like at 20 out of 100 on the volume dial there, and it's distorting. Yeah. So, yes, there is nobody really following. And even within the I mean, you've seen this too on Netflix and stuff like that, where you're watching some TV show from a long time ago. Audio's all screwed up.
Absolutely.
It's not coming out of the right speakers, and it's super quiet all at the same time.
So in terms of what to do about it, that's his next question. Yeah.
Yeah, if we're attempting to follow all of these various recommendations at home, does it mean we're supposed to say run Odyssey and then adjust the master volume down to -6 because of the ITU 1770 standard, and then another -27 dB down to meet the integrated loudness that almost all of the video streaming services are targeted? Wasn't LUFS supposed to simplify things? This all seems more confusing than ever. What's confusing is that you're trying to find one volume level to put everything at. And
which, I mean, look, when we call something reference volume, fair enough, right? The idea was supposed to be, I'm supposed to be able to set it there. So, I mean, in terms of, look, the integrated loudness, particularly in the video services, that's the dialogue. That's what we were used to thinking when all of this seemed clearer was that's going to be the 85 decibel thing, and then the peaks are going to be as high as 105 in the cinema reference volume standard, which still exists. But that wasn't that you're supposed to turn your master volume down to -27. No, that's like where dialogue should fall. And then the loudest thing should be somewhere in the range of 95 to 105. That's basically, the point that we're at now, right? Depending on the size of your room under that ITU standard, you're going to be somewhere in the range of 95 to 105 for the absolute loudest thing. And then your dialogue is going to be somewhere in the range of, 30 or 25 decibels quieter than that. That's more or less what we're getting at. So in terms of what should we do, we're basically at it's piece of content by piece of content, and you set it based on the dialogue level. You set the dialogue level to sound normal, which is going to be around 72, 75 decibels, and then you leave it there, and some things are going to be maybe 30 decibels louder than that, and that's about it.
Or you just do what I do and keep changing the volume constantly.
Yeah.
Which is what I do.
Yeah, which basically means we've destroyed what reference volume is, but blame the industry, not us.
It's not our fault.
We're just the messengers here.
I can tell you what reference volume is, but okay, so we've been talking a lot about reference volume on this podcast recently, and you may go to AV Gadgets and find that there's a article about reference volume, and I have not changed it. Why I have not changed it? Doesn't matter.
All you have to do is insert the word cinema standard in there, and you're good, Tom.
Yeah, it's really, and that's what we're talking about in the whole thing is how it's based on movies and everything else. Yeah. But there is no reference anymore, and I've written articles of, quite a few actually. Why don't my apps all sound the same? Why are they different volumes? Why do within one app is there different volumes? Why are this? Why is that? And because people are like, I don't understand why I have to keep changing the volume level because I never had to before, and which is not true. On your cable channels, you often had to change volumes. And before, when we were getting over the air, there was only, 6 channels or something like that? 3, 10, and 13, I think, was the 2, 10, and 13, something like that. At least that's what I grew up with. And then a couple of UHF channels, you still had to change volumes. Yeah. Quite a bit. So, maybe not as much because there wasn't as much content, but there is now. And it's just... it was better back in the day. It is the common refrain from people who don't understand how memory works, basically.
But I mean, in a way, it's gotten silly because look, outside of the home theater enthusiast group, nobody was worrying about I have to pick one volume level on my dial and leave it there. Yeah. And all the normal people out there who have never heard of our podcast or anything to do with home theater were like, yeah, I set the volume based on where I need it at the time. That's just what you do. But we basically gotten back there. We're like, look, just get to a dialogue scene, set it so that sounds normal, and that's where it should be.
Yeah. JR. Construction has begun on JR's new basement where we'll be closing off a section to serve as a dedicated home theater and to separate it from the rest of the basement that will be used as an apartment for his daughter. We discussed his initial plans, and one of our suggestions was to mount his SVS Prime Elevation Atmos speakers on his ceiling rather than high up on his front and back walls. We were correct that he has no problem mounting things to the ceiling, so this is the thing. This is the Go to the Flickr album or YouTube, and you'll see
Sure.
the diagram.
It's got a diagram, yes. And in the initial plans where the rear height speakers were on the back wall, same as the surround back speakers, they were very close to each other. Look, separated by height, but there wouldn't be much separation in their sound, effectively, if the surround back speakers were directly below and on the same wall as the rear heights.
So he asks exactly how far in from front to back, from the front and back wall, should his ceiling-mounted prime elevations go? He still intends to use speaker stands against the back wall to hold his surround back speakers. I don't go from the wall. We go from the couch.
Not from the wall, from the couch. That's right. So, I mean, first and foremost, worry a little bit less for the immediate moment about the overhead speakers and make sure that you have your displays, your front speakers, and your couch all set where they need to be, because those are by far the most important thing. Once you've got that nailed down, you're like, this is definitely where my couch is going to go. Then we're going to say between 4 to 5 feet in front of that couch and between 4 to 5 feet behind that couch. And that's it.
Yes. That's exactly what I would say. And I'm like, not just the couch, but also like where your face is, like where your head is. It's going to be towards the back of that couch. So, on your little lines here, it'd probably be behind the couch at right around that 5, and in front, I don't know, about the 13, around there. Maybe 12, whatever.
But yeah, if you go 4 feet in front, 4 feet behind your head location, that's going to be bang on for Atmos. Yeah.
So there you go. He assumes he would position the angled face of the prime elevation speaker so that the tweeter is aiming more towards the couch, ? Should they also be towed in, as it were, or just keep the speakers at a 90-degree angle with the walls and ceiling mounted absorption panels? If you hadn't already owned these speakers, I would just say get speakers that face directly down and then call it a day.
I mean, I certainly don't care that they've got the angled face, and yes, of course it makes sense that they're going to be like angled. So the ones behind you, right, they're going to have the faces sloping upwards so that the tweeters are coming more towards your head, and the ones are going to be the reverse at the front. So yes, of course, the tweeter is going to be aiming more towards your head than away from it.
Yeah. And then towing them in or towing them out is ridiculous. So don't do that. Just have them going straight forward. The back one's angle going forward and the front one's angle going back, so that the whatever,
and parallel and perpendicular to the walls.
It really doesn't matter.
I'm just thinking aesthetics wise, that's what's going to look.
It would
best.
look weird.
So that's what I would do.
How much I feel, how I feel about aiming every speaker directly at your face, anyways.
Yes.
So you definitely don't need to do that here. No. All right, Joseph in Australia. Joseph is the fellow with the very large home cinema that was honestly too quiet when he was using the Sonos Faber speakers he originally purchased, powered by his turn-off amplification. His installer had to calibrate his system such that it wouldn't damage his speakers if he set the master volume to 0 dB, but at that level it truly just wasn't loud enough. So we strongly recommended he replace his front 3 speakers with highly sensitive speakers instead. He wound up going with Cricks horn-loaded speakers across the front. Cricks just put out a new subwoofer I just saw. I don't remember what it was, but whatever. It was, I think it had a bunch of drivers in it. Anyways. And even though we said it wasn't necessary, he had some spare amplifier channels just sitting there doing nothing, so he bridged those to give him lots of headroom, and it has all been largely successful, but he feels he now reaches sufficient volume with the master volume set to -4, but his installer once again warned him not to ever go louder than 0, because he still set a limit due to Joseph's surround back speakers. They remain Sonos Faber models with a spec of 84 dB for their sensitivity, so even though -4 sounds sufficiently loud to him, it still isn't movie theater loud, and he doesn't have much leeway to get there if he ever wants to. His installer recommended that he also change his surround backs to more sensitive speakers. Do we agree with that assessment? And if not, why do we think he still needs to turn his master volume up so high just to sound sufficient? You might have hearing loss, my man. But so this is all about math. When it comes down to, it's how far away the speaker is from you.
Yeah.
Okay. Versus how loud the sensitivity of the speaker.
How many decibels per watt that speaker outputs,
and then
versus how many watts you have.
That's right. So the question here becomes, there's a couple of ways to deal with this situation, and you were dealing with it with your front speakers in both ways, which is you got more sensitive speakers and more amplification, so that you could reach the volume
which
level
he didn't really need the more amplification. But
he didn't, but he did both anyways. So
That's
now we're going to look at your surrounds and your surround back speakers, see how far away they are from your seat, which I do not remember, and it's not on here, so I don't know how far they are.
Yeah.
And then you would look at that and say, okay, can I get loud enough with the amplification I have, no matter what your installer says, which, you know, your installer probably is not wrong. Let's just.
I do not blame an installer for being like, we're gonna have it so that 0 dB is safe. Okay,
Yes.
It's not gonna be 105 dB peaks because your speakers just can't get there.
Right.
But we're gonna set it so that it's safe. And rather than saying, I'm going to calibrate this so that if your speakers could get there, which they can't, but if they could, 0 would be 105 dB peaks, but then I'm going to tell you never set the volume higher than minus 15 or something like that. He just shows, no, we're going to say, yeah, feel free to go up to 0, but don't go any higher than that. But when you get to 0, it's going to be as loud as your speakers can safely go, but that isn't going to be 105 dB peaks, which would be, you know, IMAX theater loud. And look, he's dealing with a theater that has the cubic footage that he isn't doing. The reference volume would have been -6 in the dubbing stage. He's closer to the full cinema volume. He's getting there with the size of the home cinema that he has. So he is getting closer to where you would want the peaks to be, you know, over 100 dB in any case. So, I mean, look, I think your installer is basically correct, right? Like, you're basically saying, I can get it to where it's comfortably loud. I couldn't even get there before.
Right.
I absolutely had to get new speakers to even just get to comfortably loud. I can get to comfortably loud now, but I don't, you know, you've still got 4 decibels of headroom. You could turn it up to 0, see how that goes. There's no reason you can't run your system at 0, right? So
he can't stop you.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you know, the installers even say that is safe. I said it so it'd be safe. So you're saying, okay, look, it's comfortably loud at -4. I want the ability to get to full movie theater loud. I mean, do you really? Look, try it at 0. If that's as loud as you would ever possibly go, okay, you're done. Great, you got there. It might not be 105 dB peaks, but you got to as loud as you would ever want to go, and it's your theater. But if you're like, look, I played it at 0, that still isn't quite as loud as I would ever like to go. I agree. Your installer is right. You have to get new speakers for your surrounds and surround backs. In his theater, they are like 20 feet away for those surround backs from the main seat. So that is a large distance for normal home speakers with 84 dB sensitivity. Those speakers should be probably no more than about 12 to 15 feet max, and his surround backs are like 20 feet away. There's not much you can do. Like, even if you put a whole bunch more watts into them, they can't get any louder. They can't take more wattage. So you have to replace those speakers if you want to get to 105 dB peaks. That isn't bad advice at all. And then your installer can come back and he can set it so that now 0 is 105, and you're like, okay, now I can set it to like -10, and that's comfortably loud for me. I don't have to get up to -4 or 0. So I would say stick with Crix. There's no reason for you to go with a different brand than Crix in your location. So
Australia is hard to find stuff for.
Yeah.
So he's either going to have to, like a lot of the stuff we would recommend. I mean, I know that Klipsch is sold there. You know, you could maybe find something there, but they're not always quite as efficient as they claim to be.
That's right.
So there's some issues there. But as long as the Crix have worked out for your fronts, I have no problems recommending. And that's
we were hoping, since your surrounds are physically closer to you than your fronts, that you might get there. And like I say, you know, 0 dB in your case is more than 3 decibels louder. You know, it's 3 and a bit decibels louder. It's more than twice the wattage at that point. It might be enough. You're thinking, ooh, I'm getting really close, and it's not quite maximum loudest, but it might be enough. So definitely try that first. If it isn't loud enough, then your installer's right. You need new surround and surround back speakers.
Yeah. And I guess the second question is, what would we recommend? And that's the Crix.
Stick with Crix in your case.
Mase. Mase used an old Chromecast, the one that ran on Android, as his main streaming device, but he switched to using his Xbox, and overall it's better, but please don't tell me it's an audio problem, because it's almost always an audio problem. For some reason, Netflix app on his Xbox does not recognize that his BenQ HT3550 projector can accept an HDR10 signal. Other apps do. It's just Netflix. Anything we can think of to fix that? Call Netflix? I don't know.
I have not come across this before.
I've never even heard of that. Like, if it's usually the device itself.
Yeah.
I guess go into the... So this is what I would do if it were me, okay? And I can't tell you that any of this is going to work. First of all, I would look at the settings within the Xbox Netflix app, which is sometimes they don't have any. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they
Yeah.
don't. They don't. But I would also go online to the Netflix and sign in on Netflix there.
Yeah, on the web.
On the web and see if the settings there allow you to enable HDR. Because sometimes with Netflix, you have to go, like the settings on the web will inform everything else.
Yeah.
So that would be my guess.
Are we absolutely sure you're subscribed to the highest tier of Netflix?
I guess that could be it too, yeah.
Well, look, you sign up to Disney Plus, you get HDR without needing to subscribe to a different tier. You sign up to Amazon Prime Video, you get HDR without needing to subscribe to a different tier. Netflix, you have to subscribe to the highest, most expensive tier. That's the only tier that gives you HDR. So I'm not going to blame anybody who's like, I signed up for Netflix on the standard plan. Wait, it doesn't have HDR like everybody else's standard plan does. So that would be covering all bases here. I'm not saying you didn't do that, but because I have not heard of the Xbox not being able to output HDR10 to a display that accepts HDR10 from Netflix, I don't think this is a hardware or an Xbox settings problem, because it's not like HDR isn't coming out at all. He's like, it's working from the other apps. So I kind of wonder if it's actually that you're subscribed to the standard tier, which I wouldn't blame you for 1 second for being like, oh crap, it's only on the premium tier for $20 a month.
So he asks, is there a universal remote option that let him use both IR, line of sight, and non-line of sight signals? His Xbox is in the media cabinet, but he has other devices where he could just point a remote.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you find a Harmony online? Because that's like an eBay or something like that.
That's what they did, right? The ones that the hub-based Harmonies still did have an
Sofa
IR.
Baton, I guess, if you're into that sort of thing.
With the Sofa Baton X1, because I mean, look, that's practically the only game in town for a somewhat reasonably priced thing that can do this. But with that one, it does not have just an IR blaster on the remote itself. But what it does have, which isn't immediately clear, is that you have the hub, which blasts out IR from it. And then it also has optional little IR extender blasters that you can plug into it with a cable. Now, in your case, you might actually take the hub for the Sofa Baton X1 and put the hub outside of the media cabinet where all your other equipment is. So it's going to be blasting the whole room with IR that way. And then you're just going to use one of those little IR extender blasters, the little cable that it comes with it. It comes with 2 of them in the box. In fact, one of them is like a pigtail one, right? That goes to 2 or 3 extra little IR blasters with the Sofa Baton X1. So that you would put one of those into the media cabinet where your Xbox is and let it handle the Xbox inside of the media cabinet. So I do think it's not quite the same as I'm literally pointing the remote that's in my hand at my devices. You can still do that. Whether you do it or not isn't going to make a difference. The IR is actually coming from the hub, but you can make it work because it isn't immediately obvious that it does have those IR extenders in the box. So you can have IR both inside and outside of the media cabinet, and you don't have to buy anything extra.
And the Harmonies had those blasters too. Like my Harmony hub is sitting next to my gear and just sort of blasts out, but then I have an extender that's just sitting on the ground to make sure it hits the projector, because it was a little inconsistent hitting the projector. Because mine's kind of it's a closet, but I took the doors off and it's off to the side. Okay. Raph has a Denon receiver with 2 independent subwoofer outputs. He's heard our recommendation to actually just use one of those sub outs and either use a Y splitter or a daisy chain as 2 subs together. How does the Oz EQ end up working if he uses a daisy chain connection? Does the single sub still get an EQ applied to it, or is the EQ going through the daisy chain connection? Is the EQ loss going through the So the EQ happens before the signals comes out?
Indeed.
So they both get the same signal. They both get the same EQ, which is what you want. Yeah, so it's not lost. It doesn't go to the first one and it uses up all the EQ.
That's right.
Because if that worked that way, it would be a lot easier to do tactile transducers. Honestly.
Indeed, yeah. No, the subwoofers are playing as one. Just imagine it's a single subwoofer that has 2 drivers, and think of your room as the cabinet instead of the physical cabinets of the subwoofers. Like you're placing those drivers wherever they are in the room, perhaps across the room from each other, but they are just playing as one. So yeah, there is a single equalized signal coming out of the subwoofer output, and then the 2 subwoofers are playing in mono together, both getting identical signals, whether they are Y-split or daisy chained.
All right, Matt in the UK. Matt was using a soundbar for a while, but he's switched over to a 5.1.2 speaker setup, powered by a Denon X2400H receiver. He ran Odyssey, but he's having trouble hearing the dialogue clearly. Without running Odyssey all over again, he played around a bit with some of the available settings. He wound up setting Odyssey dynamic volume to medium, which is the only thing that helped make voices sound a bit clearer. But with dynamic volume is on, dynamic EQ is also automatically on. That bumps up the bass, which is mostly a nice thing, but also bumps up the volume of surround speakers quite a bit. And he's not found out how that sounds in this setup. So what Odyssey settings should he have on or off for best results, and what will help him the most for making voices sound clear and intelligible? He's resorted to cranking up the center channel, but that doesn't seem like the optimal solution. Most of the time, I want to say all of the time, but that's obviously not the case. Most of the time, the problem with not hearing dialogue is your room, what's going on with your room. So many times people come in like, what speaker setting should I, or what speaker should I get? Or I can't understand the dialogue from my soundbar, blah, 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 or my stereo speakers. People say, get a center channel. Oh, they'll make a dialogue so much better. It doesn't. It doesn't. It often doesn't make it any better. So what you've done by putting on dynamic volume to medium is you've decrease the dynamic range that's going on. So there's not as much louder and softer passages, which may have brought down the background music and everything else, so that the dialogue seems a little bit. It
certainly can help sometimes, right?
Sure.
So that you don't have this huge range between the quietest part of the movie and the loudest part of the movie. That's all kind of squished together in the middle, and that can help you hear dialogue somewhat. But like he's saying, like, he doesn't really necessarily want to do that. It's just that helped him hear the dialogue a bit more clearly. And the other wrinkle in all this is that he had a soundbar before. He wasn't noticing such a dialogue intelligibility problem with the soundbar. He switched to this setup with speakers and a receiver, and now he's having trouble with that. So this brings to question, like, he's saying it's a 5.1.2, right? So he does have a center speaker, but how is that center speaker set up? What is that center speaker? Because it's certainly within the realm of possibility.
Where is it in relation? Like, my guess is, like, the sound bar was right underneath the TV on the same shelf as the TV, and the center channel was too big for that, so he put it someplace else, lower probably, and maybe pushed back into a cabinet.
Into a cabinet cubby or something like that, well within the realm of possibility. This is a case where it could be the actual speaker you're using. That's not out of the realm of possibility. It definitely could be the way the center speaker is physically set up. That has been an issue here, because, like, very often we're like, okay, it could be your seats are pushed against the back wall. You don't have any big fluffy treatments behind your head, and it's largely the bounce off the back wall that's harming your dialogue intelligibility. That could still be part of the issue in your case. We don't know for sure, but since the soundbar wasn't having so much of this problem, we're like, well, it could definitely be something with the way that your center speaker now is physically set up.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I agree with everything Rob just said, but I want you to remember too, you probably went from a speaker that was really optimized for voices. The sound bars, a lot of times, they are hamstrung
if they're going to think about it one thing.
Their design is such that they're never going to do the full 20 to 20, right?
No.
I mean, not even close. They're not even getting within the mid-range and treble. They're not even through that. So just by with their size and the number of drivers and the size of the drivers and everything else, they have problems creating an even sound frequency response throughout those upper mid-range and treble. So they're going to focus on dialogue. Like, if we're going to do something, let's make sure we EQ this bar so that we get the dialogue, and then anything else that happens, that's fine, right?
But
so now you've got a center speaker that is more capable and is doing more sound. So any problems that you had with your room as far as placement with the speaker itself, and with a hard surface behind your head, or no room treatments, or 1,000 other things that could be going wrong, anything that was already a problem that may not have been as obvious with a speaker that was less capable.
More masking effects now.
Yeah. This new center channel and your 5.1 speaker system, which has got more capabilities and just more sound coming out, suddenly everything sounds... There's just more sound.
Yeah.
And like Rob said, that there was a masking effect by there not being the sound in the room, and now the sound's in the room and it's bouncing around. And yes, dynamic EQ can make... I've heard people say this a lot. Dynamic EQ makes your surround sound louder. And that, I think, can be true, but
I mean, if you're listening with the master volume turned down quite a bit, then it can make a very noticeable difference in the surrounds.
But I think most of the time what's happening is it's room effects. These room modes and these room effects that they weren't really experiencing before, is you're having the room is suddenly creating so much more of a difference simply because you have more sound. So yes, we could talk about what settings you should put on your receiver that maybe mask some of this and everything else, but that's not really solving the problem. The problem, for the most part, is going to be, first of all, verify that your speaker is not the problem, verify that speaker placement is not the problem,
on that
and
tip,
then fix the room.
One thing you could do quite easily is just go into your AV receiver settings and tell it, I do not have a center speaker. Just temporarily, because that's just a settings change. That way, all the dialogue is going to be coming out of your front, left, and right speakers. If you listen to it that way and you're like, oh, sounds much better this way, like maybe you don't sit dead center, so the voices don't sound completely centered, and you would ideally like to have a center speaker. But if the voices sound clearer just coming from your left and right front speakers because you told your AV receiver, I don't have a center speaker, then you'll know, okay, it's something to do with the center speaker setup itself. And like we say, if it's recessed into a TV stand or something like that, you could definitely have that cupped effect around the way where all you're hearing is vowels anymore, right?
Yeah,
you're not getting the consonant sounds, and it's really tough to tell what people are saying. It's also within the realm of possibility that it's partly to do with the subwoofer to speaker crossover, because if you happen to have some big old bump right there in that crossover region, again, it can give you that very cupped, I'm getting so much bassy, vocally, vowel-y sound that it's making the consonants hard to hear. So that's one where you could just play a sweep through your system and be like, oh yeah, there's this big old bump happening in that sort of middle of the vocal range, and that can reveal that it's tough. And that would mean physically moving your subwoofer in most cases to fix that.
Yeah. His point 2 Atmos speakers are installed above the TV. Just going by the angles to his seats, he's labeled them as front heights. Would it make any difference or improvement to label them as top fronts? Try it. Try it.
Sure, but also no. Yeah. It wouldn't make any difference at all to Atmos.
You can try it. I'll be honest with you. The top fronts, the speakers that are just at the front of the room but a little bit higher, I mean, I've had them. I've heard a lot of people like, oh, that made a huge difference, but no, it didn't. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. If I turned them off, you wouldn't notice. It didn't make any difference at all.
But also, if you leave yours just labeled as front heights, you're missing nothing. You don't
I think you'll
really have to do that one.
I know. But you can. It's a setting. Like you said before, it's just a setting.
If you're going to turn off your center speaker, you can make that change too. Sure.
At the same time, while you're not. Just knock it out of the park there. Nelson and his family are moving into a new townhouse soon. The basement has a rec room that he's hoping to use as a home theater space. It's not enclosed. There's an open hallway entrance in the middle of the back wall, and the left side is completely open to an office area and the stairway going upstairs. So it's like the entire house.
Sure.
To be clear, he's not going to attempt to make this basement setup soundproof in any way. That's good. They won't be doing any renovation or construction. They won't be installing any doors. He's okay with all of that. But he would still like to acoustically treat the theater as best he can, and he's concerned that the non-symmetrical layout and the opening to the office area on the left will result in audio reflection issues. Well, you're going to have audio reflection issues no matter what, because that's what audio does. He's wondering if it would be a good idea to use some sort of freestanding temporary divider. He was thinking it might be able to hang panels on it and achieve good acoustics for the theater that way. He found the Versi panel partition wall on Amazon Canada. It's pretty expensive for an 8-foot wide, 6.5-foot tall freestanding partition, but if it's the right solution, he's open to it. What would we recommend? So, okay, let's just talk about in general. Before we go too far with this. When you have a non-symmetrical home theater where there's a wall on one side and an open space on the other.
Sure. And honestly, this isn't a very large open space to the left.
That's right.
There's a bit of an open space to the left compared to the right, but it's not gigantic by any means.
So let's just speak generally still.
Yeah.
Okay, so infinite space on one side and a wall on the other. What do you do? Do you put a partition up with some acoustic panels to catch that sound so it doesn't go into the other room? That doesn't actually do what you want it to do. What you want to do is make your room sound symmetrical. So the sound is blasting off into the infinite void on one side. You need the sound on the other side to also sound like it's blasting into
it's actually the right wall that does exist that you need to treat more heavily because of the opening on the left.
That's right. So your first reflection point on your left wall, which is blasting out into the infinite void does not exist. So you need your right wall to also sound like it has no wall there. And to do that, you put very thick panels up at the first reflection points and as many panels on that side as possible. Like really treat that wall. So in your case, your wall is not that far away, but it's also, it's probably the first reflection is going to reflect if it even gets back out into the room right away, which it might not.
If you're populating that office with office equipment, it might be pretty darn diffuse in there over on the left-hand side.
So it may not actually come back in the way that you would expect, and you may not be able to treat that first reflection point anyways. And if there was nothing in that office space and it just reflected directly off, it may not actually reflect back to your seats at all,
just with obstructions or whatever, or you can put a panel or two on the actual office wall. That'll be fine too.
So in your case, what you would be doing is not worrying about this partition.
No, there is no world where I'm telling you to buy 3 or 4 of these $1,600 Canadian each temporary partition walls. Yeah, they're like $1,600 Canadian.
Just buy a couple extra thicker panels for your right wall and call it good.
Right. That is absolutely
We just saved you like $5,000, $6,000.
If you were willing to spend those thousands of dollars for the temporary walls that you were going to move out of the way every time you wanted to go into the office, you can definitely afford some thicker panels for your right wall. And you know what? Heck, throw a couple on the back wall that does exist too.
Yeah. Say $5,000-$6,000 savings. AVRant.com/buy us a cup of coffee link. Greg says, we've praised the Ascend Sierra 2 speakers quite a bit, right? I haven't. I think they suck.
I have, though. I'm sure you do, Tom.
Hey, I am an expert Redditor. I've never heard them, therefore I have a very strong opinion about them. Greg found audio science reviews, measurements, and read up on the Sierra 2s and wondered if we think their findings jibe with our experience. Is he talking about the one with because there's more than one Sierra 2 out there? Right?
And this was the original, which is the model that I have. I have the original Sierra 2, and these were clippable measurements over at Audio Science Review of the original Sierra 2. So, partially, this is a bit moot because they don't sell that model anymore. It's the Sierra 2 EX now, which has itself been clippable designed over at Ascend Acoustics. They're one of the few audio manufacturers who has invested in that clippable measurement system, and they're doing it themselves over there. So the currently available Ascend models will measure somewhat differently than the original version. But since I do have the original version and I've been listening to them, and I never measured them myself with a clippable system, I just based on what I was hearing. This is actually a kind of a funny one because Amir did the review over there at Audio Science Review. He does exceedingly short subjective listening test sections of his reviews. It's really focused on the measurements. Sure, that's fine. Enough. That's what they do there. And this is one of the rare ones where he was actually like, these speakers actually sounded a lot better to me than the measurements indicate that they should. Like, I actually thought they sounded really good in his own subjective review. So, you know what? Hey, thumbs up to him for even admitting that, because a lot of people who do measurement-based reviews will never admit that they heard something different than what they saw in the graphs. Also, the graphs really don't look that bad. The predicted in-room response looks about like what the Harman Target says a speaker, by the people who go by that, which was first descriptive, not prescriptive, but the people who take it as prescriptive, it still follows that trend line really nicely and closely. So he's like, yeah, pretty darn good on the trend line anyway. I think maybe Greg was like, oh, they pointed out some squiggles. They pointed out that where the ribbon tweeter in the Sierra 2 crosses over to the woofer, it's higher than most other, and that's something that Dave talks readily about. The tweeter they used in there is quite small, so it's crossing over at like 3.5 kilohertz. And right in that range, there's like this little resonance that showed up in the clippable measurements there. It's there. It exists. Dave wouldn't even deny it. Also, unless you're playing specifically that sine wave tone, you're like never going to hear it. So yeah, I'm not going to deny that it's there, but unless the program material is like sustaining a note right at that frequency, it's a very sharp little razor tooth resonance that's in there. So yeah, Amir's like, look, these didn't measure perfectly, but they actually sounded to his human ears and mine really, really good. And yes, the other thing that's pointed out is very limited vertical dispersion. No surprise there. That's absolutely the case. I will 100% confirm they have very limited vertical dispersion. If you stand up or lay down above or below the axis of the tweeter vertically, you will definitely hear a difference, and the measurements back that up as well. So honestly, I don't disagree with anything that's printed there. I agree wholeheartedly, to be honest.
So this is one of the reasons why I don't like doing measurements that much for reviews. It's not that measurements aren't useful. They are totally useful.
Absolutely.
And I rely on them too. When I'm evaluating speakers, or when I'm evaluating things for my purchase, my own personal purchase, or that sort of thing. I'll take a look at it to verify my subjective listening results. Now, I don't review speakers that much anymore. They're a pain. I don't like doing them. It's it's nothing but people saying, "Why didn't you do measurements?" Well, because I don't want to. It's a pain, and I don't want to. I've got the equipment.
A lot of time.
It takes a lot of time, and then to do it right, to really do it right,
Yes.
very few people do, and I would venture to say that most of the people who do are still not really doing it 100. You can always find
because
a fault.
they're not doing 10 runs of it. Nobody got the time for that. If you're a reviewer, so yeah.
So it ends up it's just. I'd rather just do a subjective review, honestly. And listening, like for headphones, like I do a lot of headphone reviews because they're easy, and generally speaking, it's not that it doesn't take that long. You throw in you go to audiocheck.net, you listen to a sweep, you're like, oh, there's a problem in this area. Then you go to another website like YouTube or something like that where they have a sweep, but it puts the numbers up there so you can see exactly, and you listen for that same thing that you heard before, and then you find like the frequency where it exists. You kind of verify. That doesn't take that long to do, and you'd be surprised. I mean, because the reality of the situation is you can look at a measurement close enough to find an error.
Sure.
It does not matter. Like, first of all, most people don't know what the heck they're looking at anyways. But a lot of them see any squiggle, like any squiggle, and they're like, oh, well, it's not perfectly linear. It's like, come on, my man. I mean, come on. It's just like, what is audible and what is not. And I'm doing a headphone for review right now for it was just released. They announced the headphone yesterday, which was the 21st. It's a Soundcore Space One, right? They are a brand new over-ear headphone, ridiculously good for the amount of money that they're asking. I cannot believe how cheap these headphones are. And so the review is they're not for sale until the 28th. So that'll be Monday. You'll be able to see the review on Monday on avgadgets.com. And when I do this review, I'm like, listen to them, and you're like, oh, well, you never say anything but positive things about Soundcore headphones. First of all, that's not true. I have given them bad reviews. Second, though, it's not that I don't say anything bad about them. It's that they don't do anything wrong enough, or so wrong that I notice it. And I have been listening to their headphones on and off for years now, and I've got other headphones in here to review, and it's just subjectively is the most important part. Like, can you hear the difference? So yes, I can see the squiggle on the line, and yes, I can see that they don't measure perfectly flat, but for this review that you're talking about, it sounds pretty good. It sounds pretty good. Yes, they have these problems that I've identified through measurements and through subjective listening. But did you need to do the measurements to hear that when you stood up, the sound sounded different? Because that's in the end the only thing that actually matters. If you can't subjectively hear it, if it's not audible, it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, I have golden ears, so I would totally hear the difference. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. All right. He says, what's our take on the new directional bass feature being offered in Denon and Marantz receivers with 4 subwoofer outputs? Is it not in direct opposition to what all of the bass management processes do? Well, first of all, I love the new Denon and Marantz receivers with their 4 subwoofer outputs because they give you the ability to make a mono output from the whole thing. And that's what I'm going to use. So I don't care what other stuff they put in there. They can have it do 17 different subwoofers for all I care. As long as there's still the button that says, just make mine mono, I'm good to go. Because like we talked about earlier, if you're going to use a Y splitter or whatever, which I do on mine, this just makes I don't have to use a Y splitter. It just makes it a little bit easier for me. So the directional bass thing is because people think they want it, or they do want it. That's
exactly it. Yeah.
And so Denon's like, yeah, we can make that happen. Doesn't matter to us. And I'm just glad that they finally started putting back in, because for a while it wasn't there. They were dual independent subwoofer outputs,
That's right.
and there was no ability.
You had to live with them being set to separate instead of mono. Yeah. But yeah, no. The directional bass. Theoretically, I haven't tried it. Honestly, I don't have one of those brand new receivers to give it a try, so I can't say from that standpoint. Theoretically, it's not something that I would recommend. The idea that we're going to have just the left channel bass coming from that subwoofer over on the left side of the room and just the right channel bass coming from the subwoofer over on the other side of the room and front and back separated as well. From everything we know from the Harman and Todd Welty research and that isn't the optimal way to use multiple subwoofers, and experientially it isn't the optimal way that I've found, but I haven't used this exact version, so I can't completely naysay it, but theoretically it's not what I would do in terms of setting up multiple subwoofers. But yeah, I still like having the 4 subwoofer outputs. And look, if ultimately they're able to apply this to that whole new version of bass management that Dirac is doing, it's not what they designed it for, and that feature isn't available as a Dirac upgrade on the Denon Marantzes yet. But if in the future it allows them to do that, then so much the better that they have the capability already present hardware-wise.
Right. Greg's theater is basically open to his whole house. He wound up getting 3 of the 15-inch monolith subwoofers, and with them spread out around this open space, he feels like he's achieved very good uniformity in output given the situation. He's looked up measurements, and his monolith M15 subs appeared to measure very well with very low distortion.
They do indeed.
Good. But lately, he's been seeing reviews that he trusts, such as Audioholics, absolutely gushing about the latest subwoofer models from the likes of Per Listen and RBH. Supposedly, they measure much better and can provide even more output, and they're much, much more expensive. Yes. He's part of a local home theater group, and they're active on the forums. He understands the YouTube home theater crowd getting hyped about these subwoofers. But all the time spent discussing ridiculously high output and infrasonic bass below 20 hertz is starting to wear on him. Not to put too fine a point on it, but looking around at the home theater enthusiast crowd, it's a lot of dudes. Uh-huh. It seems like any hobby ends up rife with bragging rights and one-upmanship, and so it isn't surprising that home theater isn't really that different. But at the very same time, there's this focus on being objective and relying on measurements that would seem to counter all of that, and yet somehow talking about measurements seems to have turned into a bragging contest too. What do we make of all of it? It's bull.
Yeah. I mean, look, you're not wrong. I'm right there
with you.
You
have absolutely pegged it. This is my whole problem with not just audio. Every single, hobby that you can have immediately turns into a ding-dong measuring contest. Sure. That's exactly what it turns into. You can't... If you're into bass, you cannot have enough bass in your car. If you're into into tuning your car, if your car doesn't get certain HP on the horsepower on the I don't know what they call it, stand, the thing, whatever. Then you have nothing to say. If you don't have the right exhaust or the right number of turbochargers, it doesn't matter. It all ends up into a big measuring contest that ultimately means nothing.
I just kind of like that the question and comment came from a fellow who just casually mentions he's got 3 15-inch subwoofers. I know. So I'm going to throw that in there.
So, yes. Okay. How many times, and I've written an article about can a subwoofer be too big? And we talk about this all the time in the podcast where it's like you are just buying headroom, which headroom is nothing. Headroom is a performance you're not going to use. That's what all these people are doing. And frankly, from a measurement standpoint, if you're a measurement person, guy or gal, if you're a measurement person, it's very easy to get excited about the measurement. Like, wow, this is the best performing subwoofer that I have ever measured. That is exciting. If you are looking for a subwoofer that needs to be this subwoofer, this is the best of this subwoofer that there is. Okay. But what they're not saying, and what they rarely say, because it doesn't apply and it certainly doesn't make manufacturers happy, is no one needs it. You know who needs it? The Australian dude we were just talking about. He needs it.
Yes, that's right.
You don't need it. Nobody else needs it. It's like, and I love it when people start off questions, and I'm in no way slamming you, Greg, for the way that you phrased your question, because it's often phrased this way. But I love it when people start their question with, I don't hear a problem, but I read. Okay.
And that's fair enough. It's the fear and the uncertainty. It gets to you, right?
The FOMO, right?
That's what it
You're
is.
going
And
to
the
miss
FUD.
out on some of the bass, okay? Infrasonic bass is BS, okay? Infrasonic bass
Well, it does
is nothing.
exist.
Well, it might as well not. Okay, it exists in the same way that IR exists in your home theater, okay? Think about that. IR is a blast of light. Do you hear it? Do you see it? Do you hear it? I mean, do you do anything with it, right? You can point it right at your eyeball, and it will make no difference to you. That is infrasonic bass. Okay, they're like, oh, but it's the bass you hear. It is not. Okay, it is not, and it never will be. These people who are talking about these things are just spouting off the same quote-unquote knowledge that people have been spouting for years. And as science catches up to what essentially reviewers have been making up because it sounded right to them for decades, science finally tests it and goes, wait a second, that's not right. We should be changing how we talk about these things. No one should be buying a subwoofer because it goes, and I have recommended this in the past lots of times, and I have said I don't want a subwoofer that can't go at least down to 19 or 17 hertz because I want to make sure I'm not missing anything down there.
That's
right? But I have changed my tune because I have seen the science, and the science says you can't hear it, you can't feel it, it means nothing.
Yeah, until there was a way of detecting it, you had no idea it was even there to test for. Just to slightly play on the other side, I will just say from an engineering standpoint, being excited about an advancement, like what Perlisten has done in their subwoofers is an engineering bit of a marvel.
Yes.
And from that point, being excited about that, I don't have any beef with that, right? That doesn't have to equal buying advice, and it's more of a personal thing to take it as whether, I need that or I don't need it for emotional reasons. It's just, if you're excited about what they've achieved on an engineering level, I don't have any problem with that. So,
it's when you cross over into, and everyone needs to have this.
Right.
Or I need to have it because
you're lesser for not having it, which is completely not the point.
Yeah. So a lot of times, what you need to do is what I do when I listen to people talk about their home theaters or their bikes or whatever, and they're like droning on and on about these marginal improvements they've made to them, and they're super tweeters and all this other garbage. I just like, okay, oh, that's cool, yeah, that's nice, yeah, good for you, huh? Okay, have you ever tried turning it off and seeing if you can notice a difference? No, you haven't. Okay, just making sure. It's just don't worry about it. You've got good bass. You can measure it. I mean, if you're not sure, measure it. Just, it's $100. Get a microphone.
But if you just want to hear from somebody, I will tell you got fantastic subs. They are terrific values because for the amount of output and the low distortion that they can supply, there aren't there's a couple that are, competitive, but not much that's going to be any higher value than what you got. So you can feel fantastic. That's straight from me.
Yeah. And if you are worried that somehow you're not having even bass or even frequencies or something like that, it doesn't take that much to measure it. And once you measure it, then you'll know, and then you can live with a $100 microphone that you're never going to use again. Ari says, the paint is barely even dry in this new home theater room, but he's already wondering if he should pursue an upgrade. The room is 12 by 16 by 16 and a half. Oh, I'm sorry, by 6.5. It's very short.
Yeah. Low ceiling.
Just
ceiling. Above the doorways.
Yeah. So he's using a Denon X2500H receiver to power a 5.1 ELAC speaker setup. If you look at the pictures, if you're wondering what the people over at Reddit are saying, TV too high. Okay,
I see.
It actually looks a lot higher than it is because this room is very
the ceiling
short.
is so low. That's right.
Yeah, the ceiling. Like I'm looking at my screen, it's not the top of my screen. Of course, is about the same height as the top of his screen, but it's. The ceiling only reaches the door.
Put it on a mount so that it can angle downward, so he's not having to crane his neck at it.
Yeah. All right, so he's got Denon X2500H receiver powering a 5.1 ELAC speaker setup. That means he's got 2 channels of amplification just sitting there and not being used. Oh, no. So he was thinking he'd pick up a pair of ELAC A4.2 Atmos modules with the intention of sitting them on top of his front towers, using them as upward-firing Atmos speakers. The thing is, he already ran all of his wires and has zero intention of putting any new holes in the walls. There's a door in the front left corner, so getting the wire to his front left tower would mean going all the way around the room if the wire isn't in the walls and ceiling. Would it be nuts to use a wireless transmitter just for a pair of Atmos modules? What would be the cleanest way to add Atmos to a setup, and how would he handle the amplification of the Atmos speakers if he uses a wireless transmitter for the signal? First of all, don't do this.
That is absolutely my advice. This is good money after bad. This is.
Have you ever spent a bunch of money to hear no difference, but not admit it to yourself for 6 months until you realize that the power kicked off one of your amplifiers and you hadn't noticed that your Atmos modules weren't making a difference? I've talked a lot on this podcast about Atmos module effectiveness, and it's all about placement and how very rarely the placement is actually on top of your speakers.
Yeah.
I would not do this so hard. I would not do it very hard. Now,
so like I truly in this setup, and I'm not just saying this only from convenience or anything. I'm talking full on performance wise. I really would not worry about Atmos of any form in this room in particular. But if you were to insist upon expanding to 7 speakers and having a 0.2 for the Atmos, I would at least want to, since you've gone to the other effort in the rest of your room, I would at least want to do the best version of that, which in your case, since you don't want to put any holes in any walls, would be mounting a pair of speakers either on the ceiling more or less directly above your seats or just ever so slightly in front of your seats, or mounting them, I mean, on your case, as high up on the sidewalls as you can, and basically installing top middles.
Yes.
And then as far as running speaker wire to it, well, you could do it without punching holes in the walls by using like Sewell's Ghost Wire or Monoprice's equivalent version of their self-adhesive.
Wires lying on the ground in here, man. What is he
does,
about?
Yeah. But I mean, these would be going on the ceiling. So, this would be like Ghost Wire that, literally just goes up your front wall from the AV receiver position and along the ceiling, or, Monoprice's similar version, the super flat self-adhesive. Now, if you just put the wire on there, you can paint directly on the wire, which would make it not invisible because you'd still see that there's a little bit of extra depth where the wire is, even though it's super flat. Or if you're willing to, you could mud and paint over the super flat wire and then it is fully invisible. But that would be the way that you could run a pair of speaker wires from your AV receiver position on the front wall on the ceiling to a pair of top middle speakers that you mount on the ceiling, and that's not punching any holes in any walls. So, I mean, that's the way I would do it if you insist upon it, but my real answer, not just convenient, for convenience, it's easily don't do it, but even performance-wise strictly, I'm like, this isn't worth your while. I would stick with your 5.1 and enjoy it.
Yeah, top middles, or even no matter how you figure out to get top middles, or if you're going to go 0.2, that's the 0.2 to go for.
So just as a curiosity in terms of like how would you get a wireless signal and have amplification, I just want to mention the Anthony system, because like this can be very useful surrounds or surround backs or something like that too. That's one where it's a transmitter that connects, and the nice thing about the Anthony system is that with an AV receiver like yours that does not have any pre-outs, it can also accept the signal from speaker wire. So you could actually use the Anthony wireless system with a receiver that does not have pre-outs. So that's one thing that isn't often found in a lot of other wireless systems. And then it gives you 2 Class D amplifiers. You can have one amplifier directly physically next to each speaker. They do have to be plugged into a power outlet because they are an amplifier, but they're getting the signal wirelessly from the transmitter at the front of the room, and then they are powering the speakers right there physically beside them. So I do like that Anthony. It's the model 1800, and that whole package goes for $200.
Yeah, you still need power, though. We'll do Daniel, and then we'll be finished. Daniel is moving from Los Angeles to Vancouver, British Columbia, obviously. He's wondering, is there anything in the way of home theater gear that seems drastically overpriced in Canada versus the US, something he should stock up on and bring with him during his move rather than waiting to buy what he needs in Canada? I mean, everything's, I guess it depends on if you're getting paid in American dollars or Canadian dollars.
Canadian dollars. Well, yeah, sure. I mean, the sticker price, of course, always looks higher just because of exchange rate. But in terms of actual like money, if you put it through the exchange rate, is there something? Truly, the thing that jumps out is subwoofers. which, I mean, yeah, if you're having all of your furniture moved with you, purchasing subwoofers in the United States and bringing them in your moving truck as opposed to buying subwoofers here, it is a considerable cost savings to get them in the States. So, I mean, I have purchased a subwoofer in the States and physically driven across the border myself to pick it up that way, even paying the duty to bring it back, which you wouldn't necessarily have to do if you're bringing everything in a moving van, having already purchased it there. Then yeah, that's the main one, because like speaker prices and everything to do with like, you know, cables and all of that. Yeah, sure, the sticker price looks higher in Canadian dollars, but it's not some way out to lunch thing. If there's certain brands here, like particularly Paradigm and Anthem, where exchange rate wise, we're actually getting a considerably better price in Canada than the straight exchange into the United States. So there are actually some advantages there with certain brands. But as far as subwoofers go, they are just way more expensive. Like getting SVS subs in Canada is considerably more expensive. Bringing the monoprice subs in here is way more expensive. HSU, any of them, it's way more. So that's the real one that sticks out. Subwoofers in particular. Everything else, televisions, cables, wires, power protection,
just do what Rob
all of that
does
type
and
of
drive
stuff.
across the border whenever you need it.
Well, also, yeah, you're coming to Vancouver, BC. You're not far from the border to pop down to Bellingham or Seattle in Washington State and do things that way. So it's not like you're so far away from the border that you couldn't do that on occasion. But yeah, that would be my advice. Get your subwoofers before you come.
All right, who do we have left?
Okie dokie. Let me shrink this down so I can actually see this a little more clearly. And we have several names on the list. We've got John, Infinite Gary, Matt, Yannick, I got to scroll down a bit, Jason, and Tyler. There we go. So plenty left, and we'll see what we get to next week.
That's right. We'll answer your questions next week. I want to thank our listeners in the week. We want to thank Chad, Matthew, and Ari for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, as well as our 135 patrons over at patreon.com, including Daniel. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed. Chad, Matthew, Ari, thank you for your PayPal donations, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 135 patrons over there. Daniel, thank you for being one of them.
We also want to thank Yannick for talking us up to his home theater group in Quebec.
Yeah, thanks, Yannick. That's very nice. Maybe we'll welcome some new people here.
Or maybe they'll listen to the podcast and go, that Tom guy's a jerk. It's probably what's going to happen.
Or me too. Some people don't like me.
You.
I've seen the YouTube comments.
We also got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from JR, Matt in the UK, Nelson, Greg, Ari, Jay, Nick, Matt, and some other place, probably, Jason, and Tyler. Thank you for thanking us.
Yes, I'll say the names one more time. JR, Matt, Nelson, Greg, Ari, Jay, Nick, Matt, Jason, and Tyler. Thank you all very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement to us. They are definitely appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
Get your question answered. All you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.